I thought my husband was working late at his software firm grinding for that big promotion. Until I walked into Cartier and saw him buying a $45,000 diamond necklace for his 24-year-old assistant. As he proudly reached for his metal black card to impress her, I pulled out my phone and made one tap on my banking app that changed everything. What happened next turned his perfect little secret into a public disaster he never saw coming. My name is Nia, and I am 35 years old. For years I played the supportive wife standing quietly behind a man who loved to project the image of a self-made king in Atlanta's elite circles. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up and strip a toxic man of the power you gave him. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, our 7th wedding anniversary. I had left my office in Midtown early to pick up a vintage timepiece I had specially ordered for Julian. My husband Julian is a regional director at a prominent software company. He is 36 years old, impeccably groomed and obsessed with the aesthetics of black excellence. He loves bespoke suits, imported cigars, and reminding everyone at our exclusive country club about his six-figure salary. What Julian and his elitist family do not advertise is that his salary barely covers his extravagant personal lifestyle. They prefer to believe that I simply run a small freelance event planning gig that keeps me busy. They have no idea that my small gig is actually a multi-million-dollar corporate risk management and public relations firm. I handle crisis communications for major conglomerates across the East Coast. I am the silent majority shareholder of a company that generates more revenue in a quarter than Julian's entire department does in a year. I let him play the role of the sole provider because it kept his fragile ego intact and kept my overbearing mother-in-law Beatrice off my back. I walked into the Cartier boutique at Lenox Square, shaking the rain from my umbrella. The air inside smelled of expensive leather-polished glass and wealth. The security guard nodded at me, and a sales associate offered me a glass of sparkling water while I waited for my order. I turned toward the high-end jewelry displays to browse, and that is when my blood ran completely cold. Standing near the bridal and anniversary collection, completely oblivious to my presence, was Julian. He was wearing his tailored navy suit, looking every bit the successful executive he portrayed to the world. But he was not alone. Standing right beside him, practically draped over his arm, was Chloe. Chloe is Julian's junior assistant. She is 24 years old, fresh out of college, and entirely too eager to climb the social ladder. I recognized her immediately from company holiday parties, where she always wore dresses that were just a little too tight and laughed at Julian's jokes a little too loudly. I stepped behind a massive marble display pillar, my heart hammering against my ribs, and watched them. Chloe was admiring her reflection in a lighted vanity mirror. Around her neck rested a stunning, blindingly bright diamond necklace. It was the kind of piece that required a private viewing room and a serious bank account. Julian stepped behind her, resting his hands on her bare shoulders. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear, causing her to giggle and lean back against his chest. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me quickly, followed by a sharp, piercing clarity. I strained to hear their conversation over the soft classical music playing in the boutique. Chloe traced the diamonds with her manicured fingers and pouted playfully. "It is so beautiful, Julian, but are you sure it is $45,000? What if your wife finds out?" Julian scoffed, a sound of pure arrogance that I knew intimately. "Do not worry about Nia," he said, smoothing his hand down Chloe's arm. "She does not ask questions. Besides, she is just a party planner. I make the real money. You deserve the best, Chloe. Only the best for my future." Hearing him promise her the world while completely diminishing my entire existence ignited a fire in my soul. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not storm over there and cause a scene like a reality television star. I am a crisis manager. I handle disasters for a living, and I was about to handle my own husband. The sales associate, a young woman with a tight bun and white gloves, approached them with a velvet tray. "Will you be taking the necklace today, sir?" she asked politely. Julian puffed out his chest, completely immersed in his role as the wealthy benefactor. "Absolutely," he declared. He reached into his designer leather wallet and pulled out his sleek, heavy metal black card. He dropped it onto the glass counter with a deliberate, echoing clink, ensuring Chloe and the associate noticed its weight. I stared at that card from behind the marble pillar. What Julian loved to conveniently forget was the origin of that card. It was not tied to his software director's salary. It was an authorized user card linked directly to my primary corporate account. Years ago, I had given it to him for emergencies and business expenses, allowing him to believe the funds were drawn from a joint marital account fueled by his income. Because I managed all our household finances, he never looked closely at the statements. He just swiped, lived lavishly, and assumed his brilliance was paying for it all. I pulled my smartphone from my purse and opened my private corporate banking application. I navigated to the User Management tab. I saw the pending authorization request for $45,000 from Cartier. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought about the years of financial manipulation, the snide remarks from his mother Beatrice, about my lack of pedigree, the late nights I spent building my empire while he took the credit for our lifestyle. I pressed the button labeled Lock Secondary User. The sales associate picked up Julian's metal card and inserted it into the point-of-sale terminal. The machine processed for a few seconds. Then a loud, sharp beep echoed in the quiet boutique. The associate frowned, looking at the screen. "I am sorry, sir, but the card has been declined," she said softly. Chloe's smile faltered. Julian's face tightened with instant irritation. "That is impossible," he snapped, his voice rising in volume. "Run it again. Your machine must be broken." The associate politely removed the card, wiped the chip with a cloth, and inserted it once more. The boutique grew uncomfortably quiet as other patrons began to turn their heads. The machine beeped again, declined. "I am sorry, sir. It is returning a hard decline from the issuing bank," the associate explained, her voice trembling slightly under his angry glare. Julian slammed his hand against the glass counter, causing Chloe to jump. "Do you know who I am?" He raised his voice, abandoning all pretense of refinement. "I make high six figures. There is more than enough money in that account to buy this entire section of the store. Call your manager right now." The store manager, an older gentleman in a sharp gray suit, hurried over to intervene. He glanced at the terminal screen, then looked up at Julian with a mixture of professional courtesy and extreme discomfort. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience," the manager said carefully. "But the terminal message is very specific. This card is linked to a primary corporate account belonging to a Mrs. Nia. The primary account holder just restricted your access privileges manually from her device." The color drained from Julian's face so fast he looked as though he might faint. Chloe took a step away from him, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mrs. Nia?" Chloe asked, her voice high and panicked. "I thought you said you controlled the money, Julian." Julian stared at the card on the counter, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked frantically around the boutique, his eyes scanning the displays, the security guards, the other customers. That was my undeniable cue to finally make my grand entrance. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar and walked slowly toward the jewelry counter. Julian slowly turned around and saw me. The sheer absolute terror in his eyes was deeply satisfying. I smiled a cold smile, tapped my vintage watch, and spoke. "You forgot who funds your fake alpha male lifestyle, Julian." I walked away, my phone buzzing. The caller ID on the screen spelled out Beatrice in bold letters. My mother-in-law was already summoning me to fix her son's mess. I silenced the device and tossed it onto the passenger seat of my car. The rain drummed a steady, relentless beat against the windshield as I drove through the slick streets of Buckhead. The adrenaline that had spiked inside the Cartier boutique was settling into a cold, calculated focus. I steered my vehicle through the imposing iron gates of our estate. Julian's imported sports car was parked at a sharp, aggressive angle across the circular driveway. One of the tires was crushing the pristine landscaping I paid a crew top dollar to maintain. He had clearly beaten me home, driving like a maniac after his public humiliation. I parked my car neatly in the garage, took a deep breath, and stepped inside the house. The immediate sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the grand foyer. I walked into the main living area to find the remnants of a customized imported vase scattered across the Brazilian hardwood floor. Julian was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his tie loosened and his expensive suit jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. His chest heaved with heavy breaths. As soon as he saw me enter, his eyes narrowed with pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction, launching instantly into his practiced routine of emotional manipulation. "How dare you disrespect me like that in public?" he yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You think you can just shut off my card and walk away? You have absolutely no idea what you just did." I stood silently near the entryway, brushing a raindrop from my coat. I did not raise my voice. I simply watched his pathetic display. My silence only infuriated him further. "You want to know why I was with Chloe?" he shouted, stepping over the broken porcelain to get closer to me. "Because she actually respects me. She looks at me and sees a real black man, a provider, a leader." "What do you do, Nia? You sit around all day hiding behind your little public relations gig, typing on your laptop while I go out and conquer the corporate world. You do not support me. You do not uplift me. Chloe knows how to treat a successful man. You just want to emasculate me because you are insecure about your own small life." Before I could formulate a response to his spectacular delusion, a sharp, condescending sigh drifted from the adjoining sitting room. I turned my head and saw Beatrice. My mother-in-law was sitting elegantly on my custom velvet sofa, her legs crossed at the ankles. She was calmly sipping chamomile tea from one of my fine bone china cups, acting as though her son was not currently having a temper tantrum in the middle of the room. She placed the delicate teacup on its matching saucer with a deliberate clink and adjusted her pearls. "Julian is absolutely right, Nia," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with the familiar elitist poison she had utilized against me since the day we met. She smoothed down the skirt of her expensive dress. "You have completely neglected your duties as a wife. If you took an ounce of pride in your appearance and actually gave my son an heir instead of playing on your laptop all day, he would not have to look elsewhere for comfort. A man of his pedigree requires a woman who understands legacy. You do not understand how our world works. You do not come from old money. You did not even pledge a proper sorority. You are lucky a man of his stature even married you. You should be down on your knees thanking him for bringing you into this lifestyle, not humiliating him at jewelry stores." I looked at Beatrice, then at Julian. They were a perfectly matched pair of parasites, entirely convinced of their own fabricated superiority. They genuinely believed that Julian's middle management software salary was the engine keeping this massive estate running. They truly thought my risk management firm, which managed crisis communications for Fortune 500 companies, was just a cute little hobby keeping me busy between non-existent society luncheons. I did not argue with them. I did not shed a single tear or offer a single defense. Arguing with narcissists is a complete waste of breath. Instead, I turned my back on both of them and calmly walked up the sweeping grand staircase. "Where do you think you are going?" Julian demanded, following me to the base of the stairs. "I am talking to you, Nia. Get back down here and unlock that account immediately." I ignored his demands and continued my ascent, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood steps. I walked straight down the upper hallway and entered the massive master suite. I bypassed my section of the custom walk-in closet and went directly to Julian's side. The racks were lined with his precious garments. Custom-tailored Tom Ford suits, imported Italian silk shirts, Armani trousers, and exclusive velvet smoking jackets that he wore to charity galas to project the image of a titan. I walked into the adjacent utility room, grabbed a box of heavy-duty black garbage bags, and returned to the closet. I did not fold anything. I grabbed entire armfuls of his expensive suits, yanking the wooden hangers off the metal rods, and shoved them aggressively into the plastic bags. Silk ties, cashmere sweaters, imported leather belts, they all went into the trash bags. I filled 4 massive bags until they were bursting at the seams. I dragged the heavy bags out of the master suite and down the hallway to the indoor balcony that overlooked the grand foyer. Julian and Beatrice were still standing below, looking up at me with expressions of utter bewilderment. "What in the world are you doing up there?" Beatrice shrieked, clutching her pearls in genuine shock. I hoisted the first heavy garbage bag over the polished wooden railing and let it go. It plummeted down and slammed onto the hardwood floor with a massive, satisfying thud right at Julian's feet. Julian jumped back, his eyes widening in horror as an expensive silk tie spilled out of the ripped plastic. I hoisted the second bag, then the third, then the fourth, dropping them consecutively over the edge. The heavy thuds echoed through the enormous house, a physical manifestation of an eviction notice. Are you completely insane? Julian screamed, grabbing one of his ruined jackets from the floor. These are bespoke suits. You are destroying thousands of dollars of my property. Beatrice stood up from the velvet couch, her face flushed with aristocratic fury. She pointed a trembling finger up at the balcony. You ungrateful, hysterical woman, she shrieked, dropping her refined demeanor entirely. How dare you destroy his things? You have lost your mind. I will not allow you to treat my son this way in his own home. I am calling my lawyer right now, and we are going to evict you from Julian's house. You can take your little public relations gig and go back to the cheap neighborhood you came from. I brushed the dust from my hands, turned away from the balcony, and walked calmly back down the sweeping staircase. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the tension in the room build until it was suffocating. I walked past the pile of garbage bags, past a furious Julian, and stepped right up to the glass coffee table where Beatrice had placed her teacup. I reached into the inner pocket of my designer coat and pulled out a folded, legally notarized document. It was a document I always kept accessible for financial planning purposes. I unfolded the heavy paper and slapped it down onto the glass table right next to Beatrice's chamomile tea. Julian does not own this house, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. I tapped my manicured fingernail directly onto the bold print at the top of the deed. This property, along with the cars in the garage and the furniture you are currently sitting on, is legally owned by Apex Holdings LLC. I am the sole proprietor and CEO of Apex Holdings. Your son has absolutely zero equity in this estate. Beatrice stared at the legal document, her eyes scanning the prominent signatures and the official state seals. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and suddenly very old. She looked at Julian silently, demanding that he refute my claim, but Julian was staring at the paper in stunned silence. The reality of his financial illusion was finally crashing down around him. You have exactly 1 hour to get your son his trash bags and your delicate little teacup off my property, I told Beatrice, locking eyes with her. If either of you are still standing in my foyer at 5 o'clock, I will call the Atlanta Police Department and have you both arrested and forcefully removed for criminal trespassing. The silence that followed was absolute. The grand echoing house was completely devoid of sound except for the steady drumming rhythm of the rain outside the tall windows. Beatrice's hands trembled as she reached down and picked up her purse, no longer interested in defending her son's honor, now that she realized she was standing on hostile territory. Then Julian began to laugh. It was a low, ugly, desperate sound. He stepped away from the garbage bag, straightening his shoulders and attempting to regain his shattered alpha male persona. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, gripping it tightly. You really think your little technicalities scare me? Nia, Julian sneered, shaking his head. You think your pennies and your LLCs matter in the real world? I was just nominated for senior vice president at my firm this morning. I am about to step into real power. You lock my card, you throw my clothes on the floor. Go ahead, but mark my words. I am going to hire the most vicious legal team in this state. I am going to take you to court, and I am going to crush you. I will take half of this house, half of your little business, and leave you with absolutely nothing. He glared at me, expecting me to cower, expecting me to back down in the face of his corporate legal threats. He expected the quiet, supportive wife to finally break. Instead, I simply smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that made him take an involuntary step backward. I looked at the man I had spent years protecting, the man whose entire career was built on the foundation of my invisible labor and my strategic connections. He thought he was preparing for a legal battle over a house and a small event planning business. I was completely unaware of the magnitude of the war he had just declared. I crossed my arms over my chest and stared him down. Bring your lawyers, Julian, I said softly. Bring every single one of them. We will see who crushes who. I turned my back on him and walked toward my home office, leaving him standing amidst the garbage bags and shattered porcelain. He had no idea that his upcoming promotion, his corporate firm, and his entire future were already resting firmly in the palm of my hand. The game had just begun. I closed the heavy oak doors of my office behind me, shutting out the sounds of Julian cursing and Beatrice frantically making phone calls in the foyer. The thick soundproofing of the room enveloped me in total silence. I walked over to my expansive mahogany desk, my mind already calculating the next 10 moves on the chessboard. I opened my secure laptop and pulled up the financial dossiers I had been quietly assembling for the past 6 months. Julian's arrogance was his greatest weakness, a fatal flaw that blinded him to everything happening right beneath his nose. He truly believed his firm was an impenetrable fortress of power. He did not know that my corporate acquisitions group had been aggressively purchasing the debt of the parent conglomerate that controlled his firm. He did not realize that the very people he answered to were terrified of my board of directors. I poured myself a small glass of aged bourbon from the crystal decanter on my side table, taking a slow, measured sip. The amber liquid burned pleasantly down my throat, a warm contrast to the icy resolve settling over my heart. Let him flex his non-existent power. Let him show off his fake wealth to his greedy mistress. Let Beatrice run to her high society friends and spin ridiculous tales about my supposed mental breakdown. They were playing checkers while I was moving the final pieces into position for a checkmate that would permanently erase their names from the elite circles they worshipped. I glanced out the window, watching the heavy rain wash over the manicured grounds of my estate. The storm outside was nothing compared to the financial hurricane I was about to unleash upon my soon-to-be ex-husband. I sat down in my leather executive chair, opened a direct encrypted communication channel to my lead corporate attorney, and began typing the instructions that would initiate the total systematic dismantling of Julian's entire world. The morning sunlight sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany floor. I had not slept a single minute. I had not needed to. The adrenaline of dismantling a toxic marriage fueled me far better than any espresso ever could. My legal team had worked through the night at my direct command, securing my personal assets, freezing Julian out of every shadow account, and preparing the aggressive corporate maneuvers that would soon swallow his software firm whole. I was just reviewing the final forensic accounting audit of Julian's pathetic personal spending when the heavy oak doors of my sanctuary violently burst open. Kendra, Julian's older sister, stormed into my office like a hurricane wrapped in counterfeit Chanel. Close behind her was her husband, Malik. They were the self-proclaimed golden couple of Atlanta's elite social scene, constantly chasing cameras and demanding VIP treatment wherever they went. Kendra was gripping a Himalayan Birkin bag that I knew for an absolute fact was leased, and her face was twisted into a mask of aristocratic fury. Malik trailed slightly behind her, wearing a velvet tracksuit and a diamond-encrusted watch that caught the morning light. He carried himself with the swagger of a self-made mogul, projecting the false image of a man who owned the city and everyone in it. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Nia, Kendra shrieked, slamming her Birkin onto my pristine glass conference table. The sharp crack of the heavy metal hardware echoed aggressively in the quiet room. I did not flinch. I did not close my laptop. I slowly looked up from my screen, steepling my fingers together, and fixed her with a dead, hollow stare. "I highly suggest you lower your voice, Kendra," I said smoothly. "You are an uninvited guest in my home, and you are currently interrupting my work." "Your home?" Kendra laughed, a high grating sound that grated against my eardrums. She paced the length of the room, her designer heels sinking deeply into my imported Persian rug. "Do not make me laugh, Nia. My mother just called me in absolute hysterics. She told me you threw Julian's bespoke suits over a balcony like some unhinged reality television character and claimed you own this estate. You are actually trying to lock my brother out of his own life. You are going to fix this right now. You are going to call the bank, unlock his accounts, and you are going to sign whatever bogus deed you forged back over to Julian immediately." I leaned back in my leather executive chair. "And why exactly would I do that, Kendra?" "Because you are destroying our family's reputation," she screamed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. "The annual Black Excellence Gala is this weekend. Julian is receiving the Man of the Year award. Our family has spent decades cultivating a legacy of wealth, prestige, and high society influence. We are the face of Black excellence in this city. We do not do public scandals. We do not have our men humiliated at Lenox Square by a woman who cannot even appreciate the sheer pedigree she married into." She crossed her arms, looking down at me with absolute unfiltered disgust. "Let us be brutally honest, Nia. You never fit into our world. You did not pledge a proper sorority. You do not come from old money. You do not understand how generational legacy works. You are a glorified party planner. You arrange balloons and catering for corporate retreats while my brother brings home the real wealth. You should have been kissing the ground Julian walks on for elevating you to our social status. Give my brother his house back, pack up your little public relations money and disappear before we absolutely ruin you in this town. Malik stepped forward, puffing out his chest and resting his hands on his hips. He shot me a condescending smirk, eager to play the role of the intimidating alpha male, enforcing his wife's demands. You need to listen to Kendra. Kendra Nia Malik drawled, his voice dripping with arrogant condescension. You are playing a dangerous game you do not have the bankroll for. Julian is a regional director. I run the premier luxury car rental fleet in the entire state of Georgia. We cater to athletes, musicians, and real estate moguls. We are titans in this city. You are just a freelance consultant making pocket change. If you try to drag Julian through the mud, I will personally make sure my legal team buries you. Sign the house over, apologize to my mother-in-law, and walk away quietly. I sat perfectly still, letting their delusional threats wash over me. They were so utterly convinced of their own superiority. They had spent years mocking my background, belittling my career, and flaunting a lifestyle they believed they had earned through sheer excellence. They thought I was a weak, easily intimidated woman hiding behind my laptop, entirely dependent on the scraps of their alleged fortune. I reached across my desk and picked up a thick leather-bound financial ledger. I had printed the documents an hour ago, specifically anticipating this exact confrontation. The ignorance in this room is truly staggering, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. I opened the ledger and flattened the heavy pages against the desk. Let us talk about this magnificent legacy of yours, Kendra. Let us talk about the titans of industry standing in my office. Kendra scoffed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. I do not have time for your defensive little speeches, Nia. Sign the papers. I ignored her and looked directly at Malik. Tell me, Malik, how is that premier luxury car rental fleet of yours doing these days? Malik stiffened, his arrogant smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. Business is booming, he snapped defensively. We just added 3 new luxury vehicles to the fleet. You would not understand high-level corporate logistics. I slowly turned a page in the ledger, tracing a line of red ink with my finger. That is fascinating, Malik, because according to the comprehensive forensic audit conducted by my wealth management team last night, Prestige Luxury Exotics filed for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy, exactly 2 years and 4 months ago, with over $800,000 in unmanageable debt. The air in the room instantly vanished. Malik's jaw dropped and he took a sudden jerky step backward, bumping into a leather guest chair. Kendra whipped her head around to stare at her husband, her eyes wide with shock. What is she talking about, Malik? Kendra demanded, her voice trembling. I did not give him a chance to formulate a lie. I kept my eyes locked on his panicking face and read directly from the highlighted lines on the page. Your primary investor pulled out after discovering you were misappropriating funds to pay for your personal country club dues, I recited coldly. The bank repossessed your initial fleet of vehicles. Your credit score plummeted to the mid-500s and you were facing complete financial ruin. You were drowning, Malik. You still are. That is a lie! Malik shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is making this up, Kendra. She is trying to deflect because she knows Julian is going to leave her with nothing. I slowly slid a thick stack of banking statements across the smooth mahogany surface of my desk. I am not making anything up, Malik. The proof is right there in black and white. But the bankruptcy is only half the story, is it not? Let us discuss how you two have managed to maintain this flawless elite lifestyle for the past 2 years without a single dime of actual income. Kendra stepped up to the desk, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she picked up the top bank statement. She stared at the highlighted numbers, her perfectly contoured face draining of all color. What is this, Nia? She whispered, her arrogant facade cracking into 1,000 brittle pieces. That is the transaction history for a dummy corporation called Apex Holdings LLC. I explained, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the desk. You might recognize that name, Kendra. It is the same LLC that owns this estate. For the past 28 months, Apex Holdings has been making anonymous, untraceable deposits into Malik's defunct business accounts to keep creditors away from your front door. Kendra stared at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. I do not understand. Let me make it exceptionally clear for you, I said, my voice sharp and unforgiving as broken glass. I am Apex Holdings. I am the silent majority shareholder of a multi-million-dollar corporate risk management and acquisitions firm. I do not arrange balloons, Kendra. I acquire companies. I liquidate bad investments. I handle crisis communications for the most powerful executives in this country. And for the last 2 years, you and your husband have been my absolute worst investment. Malik stumbled backward until he hit the glass conference table, staring at me as if I had just grown horns. He opened his mouth to speak but could not find a single word. I stood up from my chair, towering over the ledger. When Malik went bankrupt, Julian came crying to me, terrified that your family's precious social legacy would be ruined if the country club found out his sister was entirely broke. So to keep Julian's fragile ego intact, and to keep you from becoming the laughingstock of the Black Excellence Gala, I quietly bailed you out. I paid off Malik's outstanding business loans. I funded the lease on that fake Birkin bag you are holding. I paid for the designer suits Malik wears to pretend he is a mogul. I walked around the desk and stepped right into Kendra's personal space. She was trembling violently, the bank statements crushing in her death grip. But worst of all, Kendra, I have been paying the $10,000 a month mortgage on your sprawling mansion in Buckhead. Every single month, an autodraft leaves my corporate account and pays the bank to keep a roof over your head. You do not have a legacy. You have a charity sponsorship, and I am the sole donor. Kendra looked like she was going to be physically sick. She dropped the crumpled papers onto the desk and grabbed Malik's arm. Malik, tell me this is not true, she begged, her voice rising to a hysterical, terrified pitch. Tell me we are not living on her money. Malik could not even look at his wife. He stared at the floor, sweating profusely, completely stripped of his swagger. He was a fraud, entirely exposed in the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. You came into my home, I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly off the walls. You insulted my background. You disrespected my career. You demanded I hand over my property to a man who used my stolen money to buy diamonds for his 24-year-old assistant. You actually believed you held power over me simply because you pledged a sorority, and I worked quietly for my wealth. I walked back to my desk and placed my hand on the keyboard of my laptop. The screen was already open to the Apex Holdings banking dashboard. Nia, please, Malik choked out, holding his hands up in a placating gesture, completely abandoning his tough guy persona. Let us talk about this. We can figure this out. We are family. We were never family, Malik, I stated flatly. You were a bad corporate investment, and I am cutting my losses today. I looked at Kendra, who was openly weeping, now the realization of her total destruction finally sinking in. The gala, the mansion, the cars, all of it was evaporating right before her eyes. She knew exactly what was coming. I hit the delete key on my laptop. A small, cheerful chime echoed from the computer speakers, signaling the flawless execution of the command. I just canceled the auto draft for your mortgage, Kendra, I said, shutting the laptop with a sharp, decisive snap. The grace period on your loan expired 3 weeks ago. I kept the payments manually delayed just in case Julian ever crossed the line. Let us see how long your glorious family legacy lasts when the bank forecloses on your mansion on Friday. Kendra let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. Malik physically stumbled backward, grabbing his wife by the elbow and dragging her out of my office before I could summon my private security detail. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them, leaving me in total absolute peace. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and watched the morning rain finally clear outside my window. I knew Julian would not stay quiet. Narcissists never do. They thrive on controlling the narrative and playing the victim. Sure enough, less than 12 hours later, the digital smear campaign began. I was sitting at my kitchen island the next morning, scrolling through my social media feed when Julian's face appeared on my screen. I was broadcasting live on Instagram to his thousands of followers. Gone were the tailored Tom Ford suits and the arrogant smirk. I was wearing a plain, slightly wrinkled gray t-shirt, sitting in what looked like a cheap hotel room. He rubbed his eyes, projecting the image of a broken, exhausted man. I never thought I would have to make a video like this, Julian said to the camera, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. For years I have suffered in silence, I have been the victim of a financially abusive, toxic, and controlling wife. I gave that woman everything. I funded her lifestyle, I supported her little event planning hobby, and in return, she isolated me from my finances and tried to strip me of my manhood. I watched the screen as the comments flooded in. People were calling me a monster, a gold digger, a bitter woman trying to ruin a good black man. His followers were tagging my dormant social media accounts, leaving snake emojis and demanding that I return the money I supposedly stole from him. He painted a masterful picture of a dedicated husband driven to the brink by an unhinged partner. I even managed to squeeze out a single perfectly timed tear that rolled down his cheek as he begged for prayers from his community. He conveniently left out the part about Cartier, the 24-year-old Mistress, and the multi-million-dollar corporation I actually owned. But Julian was not the only one seeking attention. 2 minutes later, my executive assistant forwarded me a link to a viral TikTok video. It was Chloe. She was dancing in the front seat of her leased Mercedes, holding up a pristine red Cartier box. The caption read, "When he makes sure his future wife gets exactly what she deserves." She opened the box to reveal the $45,000 diamond necklace. She then panned the camera to show Julian sitting in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel and flashing a victorious smile, completely unaware of the financial execution awaiting him. I paused the video and laughed out loud. The sheer unadulterated stupidity of these two people was breathtaking. I had locked Julian's access to my corporate funds right there in the boutique. I knew for an absolute fact he did not have $45,000 in his personal checking account. Out of pure curiosity, I opened my laptop and ran a discreet background check on his recent credit inquiries. The results populated within seconds. Julian had panicked after I humiliated him. Desperate to save face and keep his young mistress impressed, he had driven straight to a predatory lending agency on the outskirts of the city. He had taken out a high-risk, unsecured personal payday loan at an astronomical 400% interest rate just to buy that necklace. He had essentially mortgaged his non-existent future to buy a shiny rock for a girl who would leave him the second the money ran out. He had signed his own financial death warrant just to maintain an illusion. The sharp peal of my front doorbell interrupted my financial investigation. I secured my laptop, walked through the grand foyer, and opened the heavy mahogany door. A man in a beige windbreaker stood on my porch holding a thick manila envelope. "Are you Nia?" he asked, his tone strictly business. "I am," I replied. "You have been served," he stated flatly, pressing the heavy envelope into my hands before turning and walking quickly down the driveway. I closed the door, walked into the kitchen, and tore open the envelope. Julian had moved faster than I anticipated. He had retained Marcus Vance, one of the most ruthless, high-profile divorce attorneys in Atlanta. The man was a notorious shark, famous for taking high-net-worth clients and leaving their spouses with absolutely nothing. Julian was clearly trying to intimidate me with a big-name lawyer. I spread the legal documents across the marble island and read through his list of demands. The sheer audacity on the pages was nothing short of spectacular. Julian was petitioning for an expedited divorce based on irreconcilable differences and alleged financial abuse. His demands were neatly bulleted. He wanted immediate exclusive possession of the Buckhead estate, claiming he had paid the mortgage for the last 7 years. He demanded permanent spousal support, arguing that the emotional distress of our marriage had severely impacted his earning potential. And then I reached the final clause. My eyes scanned the paragraph and a genuine cold smile spread across my face. Julian was demanding 50% ownership of my business. The documents referred to it as my freelance public relations and event planning agency. He claimed that because he had financially supported me during the early years of our marriage, he was entitled to half the valuation of my little side project. He wanted half the profits, half the client list, and half the equity. I thought he was being vicious. He thought he was backing me into a corner, forcing me to surrender my home and my modest income just to make him go away. He firmly believed I would be terrified of a public courtroom battle, terrified of Marcus Vance, and terrified of losing the lifestyle he claimed to provide. I did not call Julian. I did not panic. I calmly gathered the divorce papers, placed them in my designer briefcase, and walked out to my car. I did not drive to a small rented co-working space. I merged onto the highway and drove directly to the financial district in downtown Atlanta. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of a gleaming 50-story glass skyscraper. The polished brass letters near the private executive elevator read Apex Holdings International. I rode the elevator to the penthouse level and walked into the primary boardroom. The room featured a massive custom-built mahogany table surrounded by 20 leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire city skyline. Waiting for me were the sharpest, most lethal legal and financial minds in the state. My personal wealth management team, my forensic accountants, and my lead corporate counsel, David. I took my seat at the head of the table and tossed Julian's divorce petition onto the polished wood. David picked up the documents, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. The room was perfectly silent as he scanned the pages. After 2 minutes, David lowered the papers and looked at me, a highly amused expression playing across his sharp features. "Hi wants 50% of the company," David stated, his voice ringing with pure disbelief. "Hi is officially petitioning the court for half of Apex Holdings." A ripple of low laughter echoed around the boardroom. My chief financial officer shook her head, pulling up a digital spreadsheet on the main presentation screen. "Does your husband have any concept of our current valuation?" Nia, the CFO, asked, highlighting our quarterly earnings. "Does he know that Apex Holdings generated more liquid capital last month than his entire software firm has recorded in the last decade? He thinks I plan children's birthday parties and write press releases for local bakeries," I replied smoothly, leaning back in my chair. "He believes his attorney is going to audit a company worth maybe $80,000. He has absolutely no idea that he just legally demanded half of a multi-billion-dollar corporate acquisitions empire." David tapped his pen against the table, his legal mind analyzing the immediate threat. "Marcus Vance is a bully, Nia. He relies on aggressive tactics to force early settlements. He assumes you are a terrified housewife desperate to keep this out of the press. We can easily quash this petition. I can file a countersuit by noon, bury them in endless discovery requests, and force Julian to pay your legal fees. Should we just offer him a minor nuisance settlement, toss him $100,000, and make him sign a strict non-disclosure agreement so he goes away quietly?" I looked out the massive windows at the city below. I thought about Julian's fake tears on Instagram. I thought about Chloe dancing with a necklace bought with predatory loan money. I thought about Beatrice and her relentless elitist insults. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to destroy my reputation and take everything I had built in the shadows. Offering a settlement would be an insult to the fire they had ignited. I turned back to David, meeting his gaze with absolute, unyielding authority. "Settle?" I asked, a cold smirk touching the corners of my mouth. "He wants 50% of my company, David. He does not know that my company just initiated a hostile takeover of the parent corporation that owns his prestigious law firm. We are not settling for a single dime. Let us give him a front-row seat to his own destruction." The annual Black Excellence Charity Gala was the absolute crown jewel of Atlanta's high society calendar. It was a suffocating sea of custom-tailored tuxedos, trailing couture gowns, and ruthless social climbing, perfectly disguised as philanthropy. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel had been transformed into a glittering palace of false prestige. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from crystal chandeliers, catching the ambient light and casting a soft, expensive glow over the city's elite. I walked into the venue wearing a backless, floor-length emerald green Tom Ford gown. It was sleek, razor-sharp, and devoid of any flashy jewelry. True wealth does not need to blind people to be seen. True power does not need to announce itself. But the moment I handed my wrap to the coat check attendant, the highly coordinated, entirely predictable attack from my soon-to-be ex-family began. Julian made his grand entrance looking like a man who had already conquered the world. He wore a stunning custom-cut midnight blue velvet tuxedo jacket that I had personally paid for during a trip to Milan last season. Clinging to his arm, looking entirely out of her depth, was Chloe. She was poured into a tight, heavily sequined crimson dress that screamed of fast fashion and desperation. It looked incredibly cheap under the sophisticated ballroom lighting. But what caught the attention of the paparazzi and the society bloggers lining the red carpet was not her dress. It was the $45,000 Cartier diamond necklace resting heavily against her collarbone. She touched it constantly, lifting her chin to ensure the flashing camera bulbs caught the sparkle. It was the exact necklace Julian had financed using a predatory high-interest payday loan just to spite me. They paused at the top of the grand sweeping staircase, posing for photographs, soaking in the superficial adoration of a crowd that only valued the illusion of success. Julian's mother, Beatrice, and his aggressive sister Kendra were already working the room with military precision. They were acting as self-appointed public relations managers for Julian's new highly scandalous relationship. They flanked Chloe like heavily perfumed bodyguards, practically dragging her by the elbow to aggressively introduce her to every prominent politician, superior court judge, and corporate executive they could corner near the champagne towers. I watched from the perimeter of the room, sipping a glass of sparkling water, as Kendra pulled a highly influential state senator aside. She gestured toward Chloe with a bright, predatory, entirely fake smile, making sure her shrill voice carried clearly over the smooth sounds of the live jazz quartet playing in the corner. I slowly walked past their little gathering on my way to find my table. Beatrice saw me approaching, and her eyes lit up with malicious glee. She immediately leaned into a circle of wealthy socialites women who spent their days organizing charity luncheons and gossiping about everyone outside their tax bracket. Beatrice did not lower her voice. In fact, she deliberately raised it, projecting her words so they would bounce off the marble pillars and land directly in my ears. "That is the ex-wife," Beatrice loudly whispered, her gaze sweeping over my emerald gown with pure, unfiltered disdain. "She is completely unraveling. She could never fit into our world. She lacks the grace, the composure, and the pedigree required for a man of Julian's extraordinary caliber. He tried to elevate her, but you cannot force class onto someone who does not understand legacy. Chloe is so much more refined. She is young, but she actually understands how to support a visionary black man instead of constantly trying to compete with his greatness." The circle of socialites cast pitying, judgmental glances in my direction. They whispered behind their manicured hands, sipping their expensive champagne and analyzing my every move. I did not break my stride. I did not frown. I simply offered them a calm, impenetrable smile, took another slow sip of my sparkling water, and continued walking toward the seating chart display near the ballroom entrance. I already knew exactly what they had done. Julian was a legacy board member for the charity foundation hosting the gala. He had pulled every string he had to humiliate me on a logistical, highly public level. While he, Chloe, Beatrice, Kendra, and Malik were seated at the most prominent VIP table directly in front of the main stage, my name card had been intentionally banished to Table 89. Table 89 was an absolute masterclass in social exile. It was pushed all the way to the very back of the massive ballroom, shoved tightly into a dark, drafty corner, directly next to the swinging double doors of the main catering kitchen. It was the table reserved for last-minute additions, low-level staff, and people the foundation actively wanted to hide. Every time a waiter rushed out with a heavy tray of appetizers or cleared plates, the thick wooden doors banged violently open, letting out blasts of suffocating heat, the harsh shouting of the kitchen staff, and the distinct, unglamorous smell of industrial dishwashers. I took my seat. I was placed next to a highly confused marketing intern who spent the entire time staring at her phone, and an elderly gentleman who fell asleep before the salad course was even served. I did not complain. I did not summon the event coordinator to demand a better seat. I did not let a single ounce of irritation show on my face. I sat perfectly still in the shadows, watching the entire glittering room revolve around my arrogant, financially illiterate husband. Dinner was served, and the gala progressed exactly as Julian had orchestrated. The clinking of crystal goblets and heavy silver cutlery filled the cavernous room. Julian held absolute court at the front table. He was laughing uproariously, constantly leaning over to kiss Chloe's hand and whispering smug jokes to Kendra and Malik. They looked like an untouchable dynasty in their prime. They were actively celebrating a victory they had not actually secured. They thought they had successfully pushed me out of their elite circle forever, erasing my financial contributions and my physical presence from their high society world. They had absolutely no idea that I had spent my entire afternoon in a downtown high-rise finalizing the aggressive, ironclad legal paperwork to legally seize the very ground they were currently dancing on. The ambient lights in the ballroom slowly dimmed, casting long shadows across the tables, and the jazz quartet faded into silence. The foundation president, a wealthy, silver-haired real estate developer named Marcus, stepped up to the glowing crystal podium. The crowd quieted down, turning their attention to the main stage. Marcus tapped the microphone, the sharp thumps echoing through the advanced sound system, and smiled out at the sea of wealthy donors. "Tonight we are here to honor absolute excellence," Marcus began, his voice deep and commanding. "We are here to celebrate individuals who embody the true spirit of leadership, community elevation, and unyielding ambition. Every year we select one individual who stands above the rest. Our Man of the Year award goes to a true visionary, a man who fights tirelessly in the corporate sector and represents the absolute pinnacle of success and integrity in Atlanta. Please stand and give a warm, resounding round of applause to our Man of the Year, Julian." The ballroom erupted in thunderous standing applause. Beatrice immediately jumped to her feet and cheered loudly, waving her hands in the air to ensure everyone saw her pride. Kendra and Malik practically pushed Julian toward the stage, slapping him on the back. Chloe clapped enthusiastically, intentionally touching her stolen Cartier necklace to ensure the event photographers caught the blinding sparkle against the stage lights. Julian strode up the carpeted steps with aggressive, practiced arrogance. He confidently buttoned his velvet jacket, stepped up to the microphone, and firmly grabbed the heavy engraved glass trophy from Marcus. He looked out over the massive crowd, visibly soaking in the applause, letting the superficial validation wash over him. He loved this. He lived for this exact type of shallow public worship. "Thank you," Julian said, his deep voice projecting absolute, perfectly manufactured false humility. "It is a profound honor to stand before so many powerful, influential leaders tonight. But success is never a solitary journey. It requires a strong foundation. It requires surrounding yourself with people who uplift your vision and breathe life into your daily ambitions. You cannot soar like an eagle when you are constantly being dragged down." Julian paused dramatically, letting the silence build in the massive room. He scanned the crowd. He looked deliberately past the VIP tables, past the influential politicians, and his eyes locked directly onto me, sitting alone in the shadows, back by the loud swinging kitchen doors. He stared right at me. A slow, victorious, incredibly arrogant smirk spread across his face. He wanted me to feel this precise moment of defeat. He wanted me to know without a shadow of a doubt that he had won the war. For a very long time, I was held back by negativity and restriction. Julian continued, maintaining unbreakable eye contact with me, his voice oozing with condescension. I was surrounded by toxic energy that simply did not match my ultimate destiny. But a man cannot reach his full unbridled potential until he breaks free and finds his true muse. He finally broke eye contact with me and looked down at Chloe sitting in the front row. He pointed directly to her, gesturing with the heavy glass trophy. "Chloe, my beautiful queen, thank you for making me feel like a real king. Thank you for showing me what genuine, unwavering support actually looks like. You are my future, and this award belongs to you." The crowd clapped politely, completely charmed by his performance. Chloe beamed, looking around the room as if she were royalty finally holding court. Beatrice wiped a dramatic, highly visible fake tear from her eye. Kendra leaned over and hugged Chloe tightly. It was a nauseating, perfectly orchestrated display of manufactured triumph. Julian held the trophy high above his head, waved to the adoring crowd, and turned to walk confidently off the stage. He had delivered his final public strike against me. He had cemented his narrative as the successful victim who had finally found happiness. But as the applause began to naturally die down and the background music started to swell, Marcus, the foundation president, quickly stepped back up to the podium and firmly grabbed the microphone. Wait, please hold your applause just a moment," Marcus said, his voice rushing through the speakers with sudden intense urgency. "Julian, please stay on the stage for just one more moment. Do not step down just yet." Julian stopped walking. He turned around, his brow furrowing in slight confusion. He adjusted his velvet jacket, looking annoyed that his perfect exit had been interrupted. The crowd murmured softly, wondering if there was a secondary award or a surprise grant announcement. The heavy stage spotlight shifted abruptly, leaving Julian standing slightly off-center in the shadows and illuminating Marcus at the podium. Before we officially conclude this portion of the evening, we have an incredibly crucial, unprecedented piece of business to address, Marcus announced, looking down at a formal wax-sealed envelope in his hands. His voice shook slightly. As many of you in the inner circle know, this foundation has faced severe, catastrophic financial difficulties over the past 2 years. We were on the brink of complete insolvency. We were literally weeks away from shutting our doors forever and canceling all our vital community outreach programs. A heavy, incredibly uncomfortable silence instantly fell over the grand ballroom. People shifted nervously in their expensive seats. Bringing up institutional financial ruin at a high society celebration gala was a massive, unthinkable breach of social etiquette. Beatrice frowned deeply, looking around the room in absolute confusion, her fan stopping mid-wave. Kendra leaned forward, whispering frantically to Malik. But yesterday afternoon, an absolute miracle happened. Marcus continued, his voice trembling with genuine, overwhelming emotion. A private, highly successful corporate investor stepped forward. This visionary individual executed a massive multi-million-dollar capital injection, immediately clearing all our institutional debt and providing an operating endowment that permanently secures this foundation for the next century. In exchange for this monumental rescue, this individual requested total financial oversight and has been unanimously voted in by the executive committee as the new majority shareholder and chairwoman of our entire charity board. Julian stood frozen on the stage, gripping his glass trophy. He looked deeply irritated that someone else was stealing his carefully planned spotlight, completely oblivious to the massive tidal wave speeding directly toward him. "We owe the very survival of our legacy to this brilliant, powerful woman," Marcus declared, raising his voice to a booming crescendo to carry over the sudden, excited, frantic whispers of the crowd. She usually prefers to work quietly behind the scenes, but tonight she steps into the light to lead us forward. Please stand and give a massive welcome to the savior of our foundation and your new board chairwoman, Ms. Nia. The heavy stage spotlight swung wildly across the room. It swept past the VIP section, blinding a horrified Beatrice, illuminating Kendra's dropped jaw and locked dead onto table 89, right next to the loud kitchen doors. I stood up smoothly, adjusting the emerald silk of my gown. I did not rush. I walked slowly down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The entire elite crowd parted like the Red Sea, turning to stare in absolute shock at the woman they had spent the last 2 hours completely ignoring. I kept my eyes locked dead onto the stage. Julian was completely paralyzed. His hands shook so violently that he nearly dropped his Man of the Year award. His jaw unhinged, hanging open in utter, paralyzing disbelief as I slowly ascended the carpeted stairs to claim my throne. The sharp click of my stiletto heels against the polished mahogany stage resonated through the absolutely silent ballroom. The entire glittering crowd, a collection of the absolute most ruthless social climbers and corporate titans, held their collective breath. I walked directly past a frozen, completely immobilized Julian. He stood practically paralyzed, his knuckles turning white as he maintained a death grip on his unearned glass trophy. I did not spare him a single glance as I bypassed him. I stepped confidently up to the crystal podium, smoothly adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the sea of stunned aristocratic faces. "Thank you, Marcus, for that incredibly generous introduction," I said, my voice projecting crisp, clear, and perfectly modulated through the advanced sound system. The acoustics in the grand ballroom were flawless, carrying my words to every dark corner of the room. "It is a profound honor to stand before all of you tonight, not just as a silent benefactor, but as the new chairwoman of this remarkable foundation. As a specialist in corporate acquisitions and risk management, I spend my life analyzing value. My firm constantly identifies distressed assets, evaluates structural vulnerabilities, and makes the necessary, often brutal decisions required. Sometimes securing the future requires aggressively cutting out bad investments." I continued, my gaze sweeping the room. I paused, letting the heavy weight of my words settle over the elite audience. I slowly turned my head, locking eyes directly with Julian. He was standing just a few feet to my left, completely exposed under the harsh stage lighting. The smug, victorious arrogance he had worn just moments ago had entirely evaporated, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated panic of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on the tracks of an oncoming freight train. The room remained perfectly, absolutely quiet. When you discover a parasite, draining the resources of a healthy entity, you do not negotiate with it, I declared, my gaze fixed intensely on Julian. You sever the connection entirely. You remove the toxic element immediately. You completely liquidate the massive liabilities dragging down your bottom line. Tonight I have applied that exact corporate philosophy to this charity, ensuring that genuine community outreach thrives while the fraudulent superficial dead weight is permanently discarded. We are entering a new era of absolute accountability. There will be no more anonymous bailouts for failing incompetent leadership, abusing these vital essential resources today. There will be absolutely no more stolen funds, subsidizing the lavish lifestyles of those who contribute absolutely nothing of real value. A collective gasp rippled through the massive audience. Wealthy socialites exchanged wide-eyed, scandalized looks. Corporate executives leaned forward in their chairs, recognizing the brutal, unmistakable language of a public corporate execution. Julian physically shrank under the oppressive weight of my stare. The acclaimed man of the year suddenly looked like a terrified, highly confused child. I smiled warmly at the crowd, instantly switching my tone back to gracious philanthropy, projecting the ultimate image of poised, untouchable leadership now. Thank you all for your continued genuine dedication to this magnificent cause. I look forward to personally auditing every single department tomorrow morning. Enjoy your wonderful evening. I turned away from the polished podium and began my descent down the opposite side of the stage. The roaring applause that immediately erupted was completely deafening, a powerful mixture of genuine admiration from the corporate sharks and sheer shock from the gossiping socialites. I walked down the carpeted steps, my emerald gown flowing seamlessly behind me, projecting the absolute picture of unbothered power. I did not look back at Julian ever once. I was still standing rigidly on the stage, completely abandoned by his adoring crowd. As my feet touched the main ballroom floor, a sudden flash of cheap crimson sequins caught my peripheral vision. Chloe was rushing aggressively toward me, her face contorted with intense, irrational fury. The sudden, humiliating realization that her wealthy alpha male was nothing more than an elaborate financial fraud had clearly shattered her fragile ego. She was holding a large, overflowing crystal goblet of deep red Cabernet Sauvignon. Her eyes were locked maliciously onto the pristine silk of my custom Tom Ford couture gown right now. She raised the glass, leaning forward with the obvious pathetic intention of staging a clumsy collision to ruin my dress and salvage some small fraction of her shattered pride. She severely underestimated my reflexes. Before a single drop of wine could spill over the crystal rim, I shot my right hand forward. I caught her wrist mid-air in a vice-like unrelenting grip. The sudden stop caused the heavy wine to slosh violently inside the glass, but not a single drop touched my emerald silk. Chloe gasped, her eyes widening in pure shock as she realized she completely failed. She was completely immobilized. She tried to yank her arm back, but I tightened my grip, my manicured nails digging sharply into her skin. I stepped directly into her personal space, forcing her to look into my eyes. The heavy scent of her cheap, overpowering perfume clashed violently with the expensive floral arrangements surrounding us. I highly suggest you be very careful, Chloe, I whispered, keeping my voice low and lethal yet perfectly pitched so that the circle of wealthy elites surrounding us could hear every single syllable clearly. If you ruin this exquisite, incredibly expensive custom silk dress today, Julian cannot possibly afford to buy you a new one. In fact, he cannot even afford the clothes currently on his own back. Chloe glared at me, her chest heaving with indignant rage. You are a liar, she hissed, struggling vainly against my iron grip. He just bought me this $45,000 necklace today. He is a millionaire. You are just a bitter, jealous ex-wife trying to ruin our profound happiness. I let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh. It was a cold, predatory sound that made the surrounding socialites lean in closer, vibrating with eager anticipation. "Oh, sweetheart," I purred, leaning in closer until my lips were merely inches from her ear. "I just finalized a comprehensive forensic audit of his shadow accounts this afternoon. Julian did not buy you that necklace. He drove to an aggressively predatory lending agency on the south side of the city and took out a high-interest unsecured payday loan to rent your temporary affection. Furthermore, he is not a millionaire. He is severely in debt. I know this because I just audited his extensive credit profile. He completely maxed out 3 separate credit cards that he secretly opened yesterday. He opened them in your name, just to lease that shiny Mercedes you drove here in. He has ruined your credit score before you even hit 25. The entire body of Chloe went rigidly still. The defensive anger in her eyes instantly morphed into genuine unadulterated terror. The color violently drained from her heavily contoured face, leaving her looking sickly pale under the glittering chandeliers. She looked desperately up at the stage where Julian was currently being ushered off by confused event staff. She suddenly realized the absolute magnitude of the financial trap she had eagerly danced into today. I slowly released her wrist, giving her a patronizing, dismissive pat on the shoulder. "Check your credit report, honey," I suggested brightly. "The interest rates are going to absolutely bury you." Chloe stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest in panic. She dropped the wineglass. The heavy crystal shattered spectacularly against the polished floor, sending a massive spray of dark red Cabernet across her own cheap sequined dress. I did not stay to watch her public breakdown. I turned gracefully and continued walking toward the exit, my head held high. But the parasite family was not quite finished. They were not finished making a public spectacle of themselves. Nia, a sharp, abrasive voice shrieked over the ambient noise of the ballroom. Beatrice marched aggressively through the parting crowd, her face flushed with aristocratic fury. She was flanked by Kendra, who looked equally unhinged. Beatrice practically vibrated with profound rage, her expensive pearls shaking against her collarbone. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, completely abandoning the refined high society persona she had spent decades carefully cultivating. "How dare you cause a massive scene like this?" Beatrice demanded, her voice echoing shrilly across the massive silent room. "You have humiliated my son. You do not belong here. You have never belonged in our world. You will pay dearly for attempting to destroy our legacy." The surrounding elites fell completely silent. The jazz quartet stopped playing. Every single eye in the grand ballroom locked onto our intense confrontation. I slowly turned to face my former mother-in-law, projecting an aura of complete control. "Beatrice, considering I just stopped paying your $25,000 country club dues, I suggest you grab some free shrimp from the buffet before security escorts your delinquent accounts out of the building." The Monday morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the primary executive boardroom at Vance and Sterling. The mahogany table stretched 20 feet across the room, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the absolute arrogance of the men sitting around it. Darius reclined in his plush leather chair, adjusting his imported silk tie with a practiced smug smile. Today was the culmination of his entire fabricated existence. Today was the open shareholder meeting where he was absolutely certain he would be named senior partner. He had spent weeks bragging about this impending promotion, treating it as his ultimate validation, the final proof that his manufactured superiority was real. To ensure his triumph had the proper audience, Darius had arrogantly invited his personal cheering section. Sitting in the visitor gallery were his mother Vivian, his sister Kendra, and his brother-in-law Malik. They looked like a matching set of desperate social climbers, whispering excitedly among themselves. Vivian wore a stiff tweed suit and a string of pearls she constantly touched, trying to project old money elegance. Kendra was visibly recovering from the absolute humiliation she suffered at the charity gala, wearing dark sunglasses to hide her puffy eyes, while Malik sat beside her, nervously checking his phone. The impending foreclosure of their Buckhead mansion was breathing heavily down their necks, but they had dragged themselves here today to watch Darius secure the family legacy. They needed his promotion to validate their toxic delusions. Darius looked over his shoulder and flashed them a victorious grin. Vivian nodded back proudly, mouthing the words, "Our senior partner." Darius turned his attention back to the front of the room, completely ready to accept his crown. At precisely 9 o'clock, Arthur Vance, the silver-haired managing partner and founder of the firm, walked into the boardroom. He did not look like a man preparing to hand out prestigious promotions. He looked pale, gaunt, and heavily burdened. The usual confident stride that commanded the room was entirely gone. He clutched a thick leather binder to his chest like a shield. The ambient chatter in the boardroom immediately died down. 40 aggressive attorneys fell silent, sensing the heavy shift in the atmosphere. "Good morning," Arthur said, his voice lacking its usual booming authority. He set the leather binder down on the podium and gripped the edges of the wood. "We have called this emergency open shareholder meeting today to discuss an unprecedented shift in our corporate structure." Darius sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. He nudged the associate sitting next to him, whispering an arrogant comment about how his numbers had saved the quarter. He was completely blind to the tension radiating from the front of the room. "As you all know," Arthur continued, clearing his throat, "the legal sector has faced significant financial headwinds over the past fiscal year. We have aggressively attempted to restructure our internal debts, but the market has been unforgiving. To protect our clients and ensure the continued survival of this firm, the executive board held an emergency session last night. We made a necessary, difficult decision." A low murmur rippled through the boardroom. Attorneys exchanged confused, nervous glances. In the gallery, Vivian stopped touching her pearls. Kendra pulled her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose, her brow furrowing. "Effective as of 6 o'clock this morning, Vance and Sterling is no longer an independent legal entity," Arthur announced, his words dropping like heavy stones into the quiet room. "We have been completely acquired. A parent conglomerate has purchased our corporate debt and assumed majority control over our operational assets, our client contracts, and our executive leadership structure." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Men in expensive suits shouted questions, demanding answers about their equity and their jobs. Darius slammed his hand flat against the table. "What do you mean we have been acquired?" Darius demanded, his voice ringing with pure entitlement. "Who bought us out? What about the senior partner nominations?" Arthur raised his hand, gesturing for silence. The room slowly quieted down. "The parent company is a corporate acquisitions firm known as Apex Holdings International." Arthur explained, his voice trembling. "They specialize in liquidating bloated management structures and dismantling toxic corporate cultures. The acquisition agreement requires a comprehensive evaluation of our current executive leadership. The old hierarchy is effectively dead. No new partners will be named today. Instead, everyone in this room will face a ruthless performance and ethical audit." Darius turned absolutely white. His dream of becoming senior partner evaporated, instantly replaced by a sudden icy dread. In the gallery, Malik visibly flinched at the mention of Apex Holdings International. He knew exactly what that name meant. He violently elbowed Kendra, his eyes wide with rising terror. "The new majority owner and CEO of Apex Holdings is here this morning to oversee this transition," Arthur announced, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She demands absolute excellence and zero tolerance for financial liability. I expect every single one of you to show her the utmost respect." Right on cue, the heavy, solid oak doors at the back of the boardroom violently swung open. Every head in the room snapped around. The air was entirely sucked out of the space. I walked through the doorway, flanked by 3 towering, intimidating corporate attorneys, holding thick briefcases. I was not wearing my usual casual freelance clothes. I was not wearing a simple cardigan or comfortable flats. I was wearing a razor-sharp, tailored black Tom Ford suit that cost more than Darius made in 6 months. My heels clicked with lethal, rhythmic precision against the polished hardwood floor. I emanated pure, ruthless authority. I walked straight down the center aisle, my gaze locked dead ahead. I did not look at the terrified associates. I did not look at Arthur standing weakly behind the podium. Darius physically recoiled in his leather chair. His eyes bulged, tracking my every movement as if I were an apparition. He looked from my designer suit to the corporate lawyers trailing behind me, his brain failing to process the reality unfolding in front of him. "In the gallery!" Vivian gasped out loud, clutching her chest as if she were having a physical heart attack. Kendra let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, sinking down in her velvet chair, trying desperately to hide behind Malik. But Malik was completely paralyzed, staring at me with the exact same terror he had shown in my home office when I exposed his bankrupt luxury car rental business. I reached the front of the boardroom. I did not wait for an invitation. I smoothly bypassed Arthur, stepped directly behind the podium, and slammed my leather briefcase down. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice cold, calm, and projecting lethal power. "My name is Sloan. I am the sole proprietor and CEO of Apex Holdings International. As of this morning, I own this building, I own your contracts, and I own your professional futures." Darius could not contain himself. His fragile ego, already battered by the charity gala and impending divorce, shattered under the weight of this public humiliation. He shoved his chair back, the leather scraping aggressively against the floor. He jumped to his feet, his face twisted into a mask of pure hysterical rage. "What is this?" Darius screamed, pointing at me. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting from Arthur to his fellow attorneys. "What kind of sick joke is this? This is my wife. She is a freelance public relations planner. She arranges balloons and caters corporate lunches. She does not own anything. She is having a psychotic breakdown." I stood perfectly still behind the podium, completely unfazed by his temper tantrum. I looked at him with an expression of mild clinical pity, as if examining a flawed specimen under a microscope. "Security!" Darius yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He waved his arms frantically toward the heavy oak doors. "Get security in here immediately. Remove this crazy, toxic woman from the building. She is trespassing. She is trying to ruin my promotion. She is completely unhinged. Get her out of here right now." The boardroom remained absolutely silent. Not a single attorney moved. The three corporate lawyers behind me crossed their arms, watching Darius self-destruct. In the gallery, Vivian buried her face in her hands, unable to watch her golden child unravel on a public stage. Arthur Vance let out a very heavy, defeated sigh. He stepped slowly forward, placing a firm, commanding hand directly onto Darius's shoulder, forcing him to stop his frantic waving. The older man looked down at Darius with a mixture of profound exhaustion and absolute unfiltered horror. "Darius, I highly suggest you shut your mouth, stop this pathetic temper tantrum, and sit down in your chair immediately." Arthur ordered, his voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that carried clearly across the perfectly silent boardroom. "You are speaking to our new CEO." Darius collapsed into his leather chair as if all the bones in his legs had suddenly dissolved. His mouth opened and closed, struggling to formulate a coherent thought, while the terrifying reality of his situation set in. I did not afford him the mercy of a single glance. I stepped out from behind the crystal podium and walked deliberately to the absolute head of the massive mahogany table, the seat historically reserved solely for the senior managing partner. Arthur Vance quickly stepped aside, yielding the space without a fraction of hesitation. I sat down, smoothing the sharp lapels of my suit jacket. The three corporate attorneys who had flanked my entrance took their positions directly behind me, standing like highly paid sentinels. I reached out and tapped a single button on the sleek console embedded in the center of the table. Instantly, the heavy automated blinds dropped over the floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the room into shadows before the massive presentation screen on the back wall flared to life. The high-definition display illuminated the terrified faces of the 40 lawyers sitting around me. In the gallery, Vivian clutched her expensive faux pearls so tightly, the string looked ready to snap, while Kendra pressed a hand over her mouth, completely paralyzed by the unfolding spectacle. Malik simply stared at the glowing screen with wide, unblinking eyes. I folded my hands perfectly on the polished wood and smiled a cold, entirely predatory smile at the captive audience. "Let us begin this highly anticipated performance evaluation," I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the boardroom. For the past 5 years, this prestigious firm has celebrated the supposedly meteoric rise of Darius. I began, clicking a small remote in my hand. A massive, detailed bar graph appeared on the screen detailing his quarterly billings and high-profile case acquisitions. You have rewarded him with bonuses, elevated his status, and gathered here today, fully intending to grant him a senior partnership based on these spectacular numbers. He projected the ultimate image of an unstoppable legal titan. I clicked the remote again. The bright green bars on the graph suddenly shattered, fracturing into dozens of smaller, highly detailed data points. The boardroom let out a collective sharp intake of breath. However, a basic forensic analysis reveals that this unstoppable legal titan is nothing more than an elaborate, heavily subsidized corporate welfare project, I stated, locking eyes with the senior partners. Darius has not independently secured a single major client in over 4 years. Darius violently jerked forward in his chair. That is an absolute lie, he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. I landed the Kensington account. I brought in the Harrison merger. I built this portfolio with my own sweat and brilliance. I did not even look at him. I simply pressed the button again. A complex web of emails, blind trusts, and corporate referral logs materialized on the massive screen in crisp, undeniable high definition. Every single major corporate Darius brought into this firm was quietly fed to him through heavily anonymized shell companies directly controlled by my public relations agency. I explained smoothly, talking over his pathetic outburst. Kensington Harrison, the Vanguard acquisition. I orchestrated every single introduction. I manipulated their legal searches to ensure they landed on his desk. I literally manufactured his entire reputation to massage his incredibly fragile ego and ensure he remained financially solvent. Take away the clients I personally bought and paid for, and his actual independent billable hours do not even cover the cost of the expensive imported coffee he drinks in the break room every morning. Arthur Vance leaned forward, his face turning an alarming shade of gray as he read the undeniable proof displayed on the projector. You generated his entire book of business, Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper, completely horrified by the massive vulnerability exposed in his firm. Every last cent of it, I confirmed sharply. He is an absolute phantom, a hollow suit propped up by my quiet, uncredited labor. But manufactured success is not why we are halting his promotion today. Incompetence is merely grounds for termination. What we are discussing today is criminal. I clicked the remote a third time. The screen flashed, replacing the referral logs with high-resolution scans of internal banking ledgers, highly confidential firm accounting spreadsheets, and stark, heavily redacted personal credit card statements. Darius let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He slumped down in his seat, his aggressive posture entirely evaporating. He suddenly looked like a man standing on a trapdoor with the lever already pulled. When conducting an acquisition audit, we look very closely at the escrow and client retainer accounts. I continued, my voice adopting the clinical, detached tone of a forensic accountant presenting evidence to a grand jury. Specifically, we look for unauthorized, highly irregular capital bleed. Over the past 8 months, Darius has been systematically siphoning funds from these primary client retainer accounts. The boardroom erupted. Several senior partners jumped out of their seats, shouting in outrage. Stealing from retainer accounts was the ultimate unforgivable sin in the legal profession, an offense that guaranteed immediate disbarment and a highly publicized criminal trial. Arthur slammed his fist onto the table, demanding silence, though his hands were shaking violently. Through an incredibly sloppy process of padding billable hours and generating fraudulent expense reports for non-existent corporate travel, Darius embezzled exactly $150,000, I announced, projecting my voice over the angry murmurs of the attorneys. I clicked the remote, flashing a rapid-fire sequence of heavily itemized receipts onto the massive screen. A $70,000 charge at an exclusive diamond jeweler, a $30,000 invoice for a private villa in the Maldives, $50,000 spread across various luxury boutiques, high-end restaurants, and exclusive spa retreats. I did not steal this money to cover medical debts or save a failing family business, I stated, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the mahogany table. He stole client funds to finance an elaborate, incredibly expensive affair with a 23-year-old junior paralegal named Jasmine. He used the stolen capital to buy her silence, purchase her loyalty, and fund a lavish, entirely fake lifestyle while continuing to bleed this firm dry. Darius buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. He could not look at the screen. He could not look at his furious colleagues. He could not even look at his family sitting in the gallery. Vivian was loudly weeping into a designer tissue, the illusion of her perfect, successful son completely obliterated in front of the most powerful people in the city. Kendra sat perfectly frozen, her mouth open, staring at the receipts detailing a lifestyle she could only dream of, paid for with stolen money. Arthur Vance did not hesitate. The veteran attorney stood up, his previous exhaustion replaced by a terrifying cold fury. His firm had been compromised, its reputation placed in severe jeopardy by the arrogance of one highly incompetent man. Darius Arthur said, his voice echoing with absolute unforgivable finality. You are terminated from this firm effective immediately. Security is currently waiting outside those double doors. You will surrender your keycard, your laptop, and your company phone right now. You will be escorted out of this building like a common criminal. My partners and I will be contacting the State Bar Association before noon to initiate immediate disbarment proceedings, and we will be turning this mountain of forensic evidence directly over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. You are completely finished. Darius scrambled to his feet. He looked like a trapped animal. The arrogant, untouchable lawyer was gone, replaced by a desperate, ruined fraud. He looked wildly around the massive boardroom, seeking a single friendly face among the 40 partners who were currently glaring at him with pure disgust. Finding zero sympathy at the table, his panicked eyes darted toward the visitor gallery. He looked at his weeping mother, his paralyzed sister, and finally locked onto his brother-in-law. Malik, Darius pleaded, his voice cracking pitifully. Malik, please, you have to help me. You know investors. You know people who can float me a loan to cover this. I can pay it back. We are family. You have to help me fix this. Malik swallowed hard. The terror in his eyes was absolute. He looked at the shattered remains of Darius, then slowly, deliberately took a large step backward, physically distancing himself from the toxic wreckage of his brother-in-law. He shook his head, refusing to meet Darius's pleading gaze. I slowly stood up from the head of the boardroom table, buttoning my suit jacket with absolute precision. I turned my head, locking my laser focus directly onto the trembling man in the gallery. Do not step back, Malik, I commanded, my voice dropping to a lethal, perfectly calm cadence. It is your turn. I smoothly bypassed Arthur Vance and took my seat directly at the head of the massive mahogany boardroom table. The plush leather chair squeaked softly as I settled into the position of absolute power. The 40 senior attorneys and junior partners remained perfectly frozen, staring at me in complete silence. In the visitor gallery, Darius's family looked entirely paralyzed. Vivian had completely stopped touching her imitation pearls, her mouth hanging open in pure disbelief. Kendra violently yanked her dark sunglasses off her face to ensure she was actually seeing reality. Malik shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between my tailored Tom Ford suit and the terrified lawyers. I reached forward and tapped a silver button on the electronic console embedded in the table. The automated window blinds smoothly descended, plunging the room into shadows before a massive projector screen dropped from the ceiling. The high-definition display illuminated the room with a brilliant, blinding white light. Darius remained standing near his chair, his chest heaving with indignant rage. You are trespassing, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. This is a highly classified corporate meeting. She is a freelance public relations consultant. She plans parties and writes press releases. Someone call security and drag her out of my building right now. I did not flinch, nor did I break eye contact with his terrified managing partner. Arthur Vance looked completely nauseated, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. Sit down and shut your mouth, Darius, Arthur commanded, his voice trembling with furious panic. You are speaking to the new majority owner of this entire legal conglomerate. Darius collapsed into his seat as if his knees had been physically shattered. I pressed the clicker in my hand. The first slide of my PowerPoint presentation flashed onto the massive screen. It was not a marketing deck. It was not a public relations strategy. It was a highly detailed, aggressively thorough forensic accounting audit. For the past 4 years, this prestigious law firm has aggressively championed the supposedly meteoric rise of Darius Price, began my voice perfectly calm and projecting lethal authority across the silent room. You have constantly praised his billing hours, rewarded his client acquisitions, and gathered here today, fully intending to grant him a senior partnership based on his manufactured reputation as an unstoppable legal titan. I clicked the remote again, pulling up a complex, heavily documented spreadsheet. However, a basic forensic analysis reveals that your golden boy is nothing more than an elaborate corporate welfare project, I stated, my gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the senior partners. He has not independently secured a single major legal case in over 4 years. The boardroom erupted into immediate chaotic murmurs. Attorneys exchanged bewildered, highly concerned glances. Darius jumped up again, slamming both hands violently onto the mahogany table. That is an absolute lie, he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. I brought in the Kensington account. I landed the Harrison corporate merger. I built my entire portfolio with my own brilliance. I ignored his pathetic outburst and clicked the remote. A detailed web of emails, blind trusts, and corporate referral logs materialized on the screen in undeniable clarity. Every single major corporate client Darius brought into this firm was quietly fed to him through heavily anonymized shell companies, directly controlled by my primary holding firm, I explained, talking smoothly over his frantic denials. Kensington Harrison, the Vanguard acquisition. I orchestrated every single corporate introduction. I manipulated their legal retainer searches to ensure they landed directly on his desk. I literally manufactured his entire professional reputation to massage his incredibly fragile ego and ensure he remained financially solvent. Take away the elite clients I personally bought and paid for, and his actual independent billable hours do not even cover the cost of his imported leather shoes. The room fell completely suffocatingly quiet. Arthur Vance leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table as he read the undeniable, irrefutable proof displayed on the projector. You generated his entire book of business. Arthur asked, his voice barely a terrified whisper. Every last cent of it, I confirmed, sharply, projecting absolute dominance. He is an absolute phantom, a hollow suit, propped up entirely by my quiet, uncredited labor. In the gallery, Vivian pressed a trembling hand against her chest, looking like she was going to be physically sick. Her perfect, highly successful son had just been exposed as a completely incompetent fraud in front of his entire firm. But manufactured success is not why we are halting his senior partnership today, I continued, my tone shifting from analytical to aggressively lethal. Incompetence is merely grounds for termination. What we are discussing this morning is highly criminal. I clicked the remote for a third time. The screen flashed violently, replacing the referral logs with high-resolution scans of internal banking ledgers, highly confidential firm accounting spreadsheets, and stark, heavily redacted personal credit card statements. Darius let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He slumped heavily back down in his chair, his aggressive posture entirely evaporating. He suddenly looked like a man standing on a trapdoor with the execution lever already pulled. When conducting an acquisition audit, we look very closely at the corporate escrow and client retainer accounts. I explained, my voice echoing loudly in the completely silent room. Specifically, my forensic team looks for unauthorized, highly irregular capital bleed. Over the past 8 months, Darius has been systematically siphoning massive funds directly from these primary client retainer accounts. The boardroom instantly exploded. Multiple senior partners jumped out of their seats, shouting in utter, unfiltered outrage. Stealing from client retainer accounts was the ultimate unforgivable sin in the legal profession, a catastrophic offense that guaranteed immediate disbarment and a highly publicized, deeply humiliating criminal trial. Arthur slammed his fist onto the table, demanding silence, though his own hands were shaking violently with absolute rage. Through an incredibly sloppy, highly amateur process of padding billable hours and generating fraudulent expense reports for non-existent corporate travel, Darius embezzled exactly $150,000, I announced, projecting my voice forcefully over the angry murmurs of the attorneys. I clicked the remote, rapidly flashing a sequence of heavily itemized, undeniably clear receipts onto the massive projector screen. a $45,000 charge at an exclusive diamond jeweler, a $30,000 invoice for a private luxury villa in the Maldives, $75,000 spread across various luxury clothing boutiques, high-end restaurants, and exclusive couples spa retreats. He did not steal this massive sum of money to cover emergency medical debts or save a failing family business, I stated, leaning forward and resting my elbows deliberately on the mahogany table. He brazenly stole client funds to finance an elaborate, incredibly expensive affair with a 23-year-old junior paralegal named Jasmine. He used the stolen capital to buy her silence, purchase her loyalty, and fund a lavish, entirely fake lifestyle, while continuing to bleed this prestigious firm completely dry. Darius buried his face entirely in his trembling hands, his shoulders heaving with pathetic, cowardly sobs. He could not look at the glowing screen. He could not look at his furious, highly disgusted colleagues. He could not even look at his family sitting completely paralyzed in the visitor gallery. Vivian was loudly weeping into a crumpled designer tissue, the glorious illusion of her perfect, wildly successful son, completely obliterated in front of the most powerful corporate leaders in the entire city. Kendra sat perfectly frozen in her velvet chair, her jaw hanging open, staring at the detailed receipts documenting a lifestyle she could only dream of, entirely paid for with highly illegal stolen money. Arthur Vance did not hesitate for a single second. The veteran managing partner stood up tall, his previous exhaustion completely replaced by a terrifying cold and absolute fury. His firm had been severely compromised, its pristine reputation placed in severe jeopardy by the unbelievable arrogance of one highly incompetent, deeply fraudulent man. Darius Arthur said, his voice echoing with absolute unforgivable finality across the room. "You are terminated from this firm, effective immediately. You are fired for gross misconduct and blatant corporate theft. Security is currently waiting outside those double oak doors. You will surrender your keycard, your laptop, and your company phone right now. You will be physically escorted out of this building. My partners will be contacting the State Bar Association before noon to initiate disbarment proceedings, turning this forensic evidence over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Darius scrambled frantically to his feet, a desperate, ruined fraud. Finding absolutely zero sympathy among his disgusted colleagues, his panicked eyes shifted toward the gallery. "Malik," Darius pleaded, his voice cracking. "Malik, please, you must help me. You know wealthy investors. I can pay it back. We are family." Malik swallowed hard. He stepped back, distancing himself. I turned my laser focus to Malik. "Don't step back, Malik. It's your turn." I clicked the remote, resting in the palm of my hand. The massive screen behind me instantly shifted, erasing the damning evidence of Darius and his miserable embezzlement. In its place, a crisp, highly detailed corporate organizational chart materialized, dominated by the bold, recognizable logo of Vanguard Global Logistics. This was the crown jewel of Malik and his supposedly untouchable business empire. The entire room shifted its collective gaze from the ruined attorney slouched at the table to the sweating, completely paralyzed man standing in the visitor gallery. Malik stared at the glowing screen as if it were a loaded weapon pointed directly at his chest. His expensive, custom-tailored suit suddenly seemed entirely too large for his shrinking frame. For years, Malik has aggressively positioned himself as a titan of the shipping industry, I announced, projecting my voice clearly across the shocked boardroom. He has paraded through elite country clubs, hosted lavish charity dinners, and proudly presented himself as the ultimate financial anchor of this highly arrogant family. You have all heard the endless suffocating bragging. You have all endured the suffocating arrogance. I clicked the remote again. The pristine Vanguard logo violently fractured, replaced by a dense, undeniable grid of federal tax liens, defaulted commercial promissory notes, and aggressive corporate bankruptcy filings. However, a rigorous, unyielding corporate audit paints an entirely different, incredibly pathetic reality. I stated, my tone absolutely devoid of any mercy. Vanguard Global Logistics has not turned a single cent of legitimate profit in over 36 months. The company is completely, irrevocably insolvent. It is a hollow shell drowning in massive, unmanageable debt. A collective murmur of pure disbelief swept through the seated attorneys. They were corporate lawyers trained to instantly recognize the catastrophic severity of the financial documents currently illuminating the dark room. Malik violently shook his head, his hands raised defensively as he frantically backed away from the gallery railing. "This is a complete lie," Malik shouted, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "She is fabricating these documents. My company is thriving. We just expanded our fleet. We are securing major international contracts." I did not even blink. I simply pressed the button again. The screen flashed, projecting highly confidential, perfectly clear banking records, federal wire transfer logs, and forged executive loan applications. "He did not expand his fleet," I declared, cutting through his pathetic denials with razor-sharp precision. "He systematically liquidated his remaining assets to maintain the grand illusion of spectacular wealth." But simple failure was not enough for Malik. When the legitimate banks aggressively cut off his credit, he turned to highly illegal, completely fraudulent methods to sustain his luxurious, deeply fake lifestyle. I stepped out from behind the podium, walking slowly and deliberately toward the gallery. I locked my eyes directly onto Kendra. She was sitting completely frozen, her dark sunglasses discarded on her lap, her face completely drained of color. "Kendra, you have spent the last 5 years aggressively looking down your nose at me," I said, my voice smooth and lethal. "You constantly bragged about your perfect, incredibly wealthy husband. You endlessly flaunted your sprawling Buckhead mansion, your imported sports cars, and your elite, untouchable status. You treated everyone around you like dirt because you genuinely believed your financial superiority made you invincible. You believed you were a golden, untouchable queen married to a corporate king." I pointed a manicured finger directly at the glowing projection screen. "Look very closely at those commercial loan applications, Kendra. Look at the primary guarantor signatures." Kendra slowly turned her head. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror as she scanned the massive documents. "Malik did not secure those multi-million-dollar loans using his own ruined credit," I revealed, letting the absolute severity of the truth sink into the silent room. "He committed aggressive, undeniable wire fraud. He secretly used your name, your social security number, and your completely forged signature to illegally secure over $4 million in commercial debt." The Golden family illusion completely shattered in a single devastating heartbeat. The entire boardroom watched in stunned silence as the absolute gravity of my words crashed down upon Kendra. Every single luxury she had ever bragged about, every expensive vacation, every piece of designer clothing had been financed through massive, highly illegal fraud committed entirely in her name. She was not a wealthy socialite. She was the unwitting primary target of a massive federal crime, legally liable for millions of dollars she could not possibly repay. The Buckhead mansion she loved so deeply was not a castle. It was a guaranteed impending foreclosure. "Malik," Kendra whispered, her voice shaking violently as she slowly stood up from her velvet chair. She turned to face her husband, her hands trembling at her sides. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not forge my name on federal bank loans." Malik could not look her in the eye. He stared firmly at the carpeted floor, his face shining with cold sweat. "Kendra, baby, I can explain everything," he stammered, holding his hands up in a weak defensive gesture. "It was just a temporary fix. I needed capital to bridge the gap. I was going to pay it all back before you ever found out. It was for our family." That pathetic, cowardly confession was the absolute breaking point. Kendra let out a visceral, blood-curdling scream that echoed violently off the mahogany walls. The perfectly composed, deeply arrogant society woman completely vanished, replaced by a feral, totally unhinged force of pure rage. She lunged forward, closing the distance between them in a single step. "You ruined my life," Kendra shrieked, swinging her arms wildly. "You bankrupt, lying, pathetic fraud!" She grabbed her heavy, incredibly expensive designer handbag by its thick leather strap. With a scream of absolute fury, she swung the heavy purse like a medieval weapon, smashing it directly into the side of Malik's face. The heavy gold hardware struck his cheekbone with a sickening, audible crack. Malik yelled in pain, stumbling backward against the gallery wall, racing his arms to shield his face from his infuriated wife. Kendra did not stop. She completely lost her mind, launching herself at him with manic, uncontrolled energy. She clawed at his expensive suit, tearing the fabric, slapping him across the head, and screaming a barrage of furious, humiliated insults. "You stole my name. You destroyed my future. I am going to federal prison because of you." The elite corporate boardroom devolved into absolute unfiltered chaos. The 40 highly respected attorneys sat completely paralyzed, watching the wealthy, arrogant family physically brawl in the visitor gallery. Arthur Vance stood frozen behind the main table, entirely incapable of stopping the spectacular, highly public implosion happening in his firm. Darius remained slumped in his chair, completely ignoring his sister, violently attacking his brother-in-law, utterly consumed by his own catastrophic ruin. Vivian could no longer handle the absolute crushing weight of the profound humiliation. Her perfect son was a fired, disbarred embezzler. Her wealthy son-in-law was a desperate federal criminal. Her flawless daughter was currently engaged in a physical street brawl inside an elite corporate boardroom. Her entire carefully manufactured dynasty of wealth, power, and superiority was burning to ash right in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. Vivian needed to stop the meeting. She needed to halt the presentation, clear the room, and desperately salvage whatever tiny fraction of dignity she had left. Vivian gasped loudly, a harsh, highly dramatic sound designed specifically to draw every eye in the room. She aggressively clutched her chest with both hands, her face contorting into an elaborate theatrical mask of extreme physical agony. "Oh, my chest!" Vivian wailed loudly, stumbling forward and grabbing the wooden railing for support. "I cannot breathe. The stress is killing me. Help me." She let out a loud, highly practiced groan and dramatically collapsed onto the carpeted floor of the gallery, lying perfectly flat on her back. She closed her eyes tightly, panting heavily, fully expecting the room to stop the proceedings and rush to her aid. She fully expected me to panic, shut down the projector, and surrender my absolute victory out of basic human compassion. I absolutely did not flinch or even react. I did not move a single muscle to try and help her today. I stood perfectly straight, my posture entirely relaxed, projecting cold, impenetrable dominance. The 3 corporate lawyers standing behind me did not even blink. I calmly reached into my sleek black leather briefcase resting on the podium. I slowly pulled out a crisp, heavy manila folder and deliberately slammed it down hard onto the polished wood. The sharp noise cut instantly through Kendra's screaming and Vivian's highly theatrical groaning. "Stop performing, Vivian!" I commanded, my voice slicing through the chaotic room with absolute chilling authority. "I pulled your medical records during my corporate audit of Darius's insurance plan. Your heart is perfectly fine, but your credit score, that's on life support." Vivian's fake medical emergency instantly evaporated into the stale, heavily air-conditioned atmosphere of the boardroom. She scrambled awkwardly to her feet, her face flushing a deep, highly unattractive shade of mottled red, as the remaining senior partners stared at her with absolute unfiltered disgust. I did not waste another single second on their pathetic, entirely predictable family drama. I signaled to my 3 corporate attorneys with a sharp, decisive nod, turned smoothly on my heel, and strode confidently out of the boardroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a loud, resounding thud, completely sealing Darius and his parasitic family inside their newly created, inescapable tomb of financial ruin. I walked briskly down the plush, thickly carpeted hallway toward the executive elevators, my designer heels clicking in a rhythmic, undeniably victorious cadence against the floorboards. My meticulous, highly calculated work on the 70th floor was completely finished. The toxic financial cancer had been surgically excised from the corporate structure. Now I needed to handle the final dangling thread of this spectacular, multi-million-dollar implosion waiting patiently down on the ground floor. The polished steel doors of the private executive elevator slid open seamlessly, and I stepped inside, watching the illuminated floor numbers rapidly descend toward the lobby. The ground floor lobby of Vance and Sterling was a sprawling, cavernous space, designed specifically to intimidate visitors and project an aura of untouchable wealth. Massive, highly polished marble pillars reached up to a vaulted glass ceiling, while a sleek, ultra-modern security desk anchored the direct center of the expansive room. Sitting casually on a pristine white leather sofa near the main entrance was Jasmine, She looked exactly like the expensive, carefully curated, highly demanding mistress she was. She wore a tight designer crimson dress that left very little to the imagination, paired with towering stiletto heels that probably cost a full month of my former freelance salary. Around her slender neck hung the infamous $45,000 Cartier diamond necklace, catching the ambient lobby light and sparking brilliantly for everyone to see. She was typing rapidly on her expensive smartphone, a smug, highly entitled smile playing across her perfectly glossed lips. She was completely oblivious to the catastrophic, life-altering reality unfolding 70 floors above her head. She was waiting for Darius to come down, fully expecting him to sweep her away to an incredibly lavish celebratory lunch as a newly minted senior partner. She fully expected him to hand her a brand new company credit card with a massively expanded limit. She expected her carefully manufactured, incredibly expensive fairy tale to continue indefinitely without any consequences. Suddenly, one of the secondary employee elevators abruptly chimed. The metal doors jerked open and Darius stumbled clumsily out into the expansive, brightly lit lobby. He absolutely did not look like a triumphant, newly promoted legal titan. He looked exactly like a completely broken man who had just survived a violent, catastrophic collision. His expensive, custom-tailored suit jacket was entirely gone. His silk tie was hanging loosely around his neck like a noose, and his expensive dress shirt was completely soaked with cold, nervous sweat. In his trembling, visibly shaking hands, he carried a cheap, flimsy cardboard box, hastily packed with a few miserable, insignificant personal items. A small framed degree, a shattered coffee mug, and a pathetic handful of company pens rattled inside the box. He was hyperventilating loudly, his chest heaving aggressively, as he looked wildly around the massive lobby with wide, completely crazed, bloodshot eyes. Two large, extremely broad-shouldered corporate security guards flanked him closely, their expressions completely devoid of any sympathy as they physically escorted him toward the revolving glass doors. Jasmine finally looked up from her glowing phone screen. Her smug, entirely entitled smile instantly vanished, replaced by a rigid mask of profound, unadulterated confusion. She stood up quickly, smoothing her crimson dress, and took a hesitant, deeply uncertain step toward him. Darius spotted her standing near the security desk. A tiny, pathetic flicker of desperate hope momentarily illuminated his completely ruined face. He practically threw himself toward her, nearly dropping his tragic cardboard box onto the marble floor. "Jasmine," he gasped loudly, his voice cracking pitifully and echoing across the large room. "Jasmine, baby, we have to leave this building right now. It is an absolute complete disaster upstairs. They fired me in front of everyone. They took absolutely everything from me. The senior partners are calling the district attorney right now. We need to get to your apartment immediately and figure out a desperate plan to survive this. I urgently need to use your car to get out of here." Jasmine stopped dead in her tracks, acting as if she had just hit an invisible brick wall. She looked closely at the cheap, pathetic cardboard box clutched to his chest, then looked nervously at the imposing, highly muscular security guards hovering directly behind his shoulders. Her beautiful, perfectly contoured face aggressively twisted into a harsh expression of raw, completely unfiltered disgust. She took a very deliberate, highly aggressive step backward physically, recoiling from him, as if he were suddenly covered in a highly contagious, deeply repulsive disease. "What on earth do you mean you are fired?" she demanded, her voice shrill, panicked, and carrying clearly across the quiet, echoing marble lobby. "What happened to your guaranteed senior partnership? What about my new luxury apartment lease you explicitly promised to co-sign tomorrow morning? You promised me a massive upgrade to my lifestyle. I have absolutely nothing left." Darius whimpered pathetically, reaching out a weak, violently trembling hand toward her bare arm. "My wife's loan, she secretly bought the entire firm. She completely orchestrated this entire nightmare. She froze all my banking accounts and exposed the retainer funds. We have to go right now before it gets worse." Jasmine violently slapped his trembling hand away before he could even touch her skin. Her eyes turned instantly, as cold and incredibly hard as the expensive diamonds currently resting around her neck. "Are you completely, utterly insane?" she shrieked loudly, her voice dripping with absolute unforgivable venom. I am absolutely not going anywhere with a fired, completely ruined criminal. You explicitly told me you were making millions of dollars independently. You promised me you were immediately divorcing that boring, pathetic freelance caterer and moving me into an exclusive downtown penthouse. You are nothing but a broke, completely pathetic fraud. We are completely over-effective immediately. Do not ever try to speak to me again. At that exact perfectly timed moment, my private executive elevator chimed loudly. The highly polished steel doors slid open smoothly, and I stepped directly into the main lobby. I walked slowly, deliberately, and with absolute terrifying confidence toward the pathetic, deeply humiliating scene unfolding near the front security desk. Darius completely froze, his bloodshot eyes bulging wildly from his skull as he watched me approach. He desperately clutched his miserable cardboard box tightly to his chest, like a frightened child holding a security blanket, utterly paralyzed by the absolute comprehensive destruction of his entire life. Jasmine spun around aggressively, her towering high heels clicking loudly on the hard marble floor. She glared directly at me, her chest heaving heavily with indignant, highly misplaced rage. She looked me up and down, critically taking in my immaculate, incredibly expensive Tom Ford suit, completely failing to understand the immense lethal corporate power I currently wielded over her existence. You must be Sloane. Jasmine sneered loudly, aggressively, crossing her bare arms defensively across her chest. You can keep this broke, lying, pathetic loser. I am completely, utterly done with him. He is officially your massive problem now. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from her, a cold, entirely clinical smile spreading slowly across my face. I looked directly at the glittering, highly conspicuous Cartier necklace resting perfectly against her collarbone. I looked critically at the shiny keys to her newly leased Mercedes, currently dangling from her expensive designer handbag. Oh, Jasmine, I said calmly, my voice projecting absolute unyielding authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the entire lobby. He is absolutely not my problem anymore. But unfortunately for you, he is about to become your massive, entirely insurmountable legal nightmare. Jasmine frowned deeply, her highly arrogant, entirely confident facade faltering slightly under my completely unfazed, piercing gaze. What exactly are you talking about? She demanded, her voice losing a significant fraction of its shrill, entitled confidence. I am walking out of these front doors right now, and I am never looking back. You are absolutely not walking anywhere, I corrected sharply, my tone leaving zero room for argument. During my highly comprehensive, incredibly detailed forensic audit of Darius's personal and professional accounts, I did not just track his massive corporate embezzlement. I aggressively tracked exactly where every single stolen dollar ultimately went. That $45,000 Cartier diamond necklace you are currently flaunting around your neck. The expensive monthly lease payments on that luxury vehicle you drove here today. The exorbitant, highly inflated rent for your exclusive downtown apartment. Every single luxury item you have enjoyed for the past 8 months was purchased directly using stolen, highly illegal corporate funds. Jasmine physically stumbled backward, her manicured hand flying up instinctively to clutch the heavy diamond necklace. You are completely lying, she gasped loudly, her wide eyes darting nervously toward the front glass entrance. He explicitly told me those were legitimate gifts. He told me he earned that massive amount of money through his spectacular performance bonuses. He lied to you, just like he lied to everyone else, I stated coldly, showing her absolutely zero mercy or compassion. And because he used stolen company funds to purchase those specific highly expensive items, you are currently standing in the lobby of my commercial building in physical, undeniable possession of stolen corporate property. That constitutes a severe, highly punishable federal crime. Jasmine. Ignorance is absolutely not a valid legal defense when the forensic paper trail directly and undeniably links you to the embezzled capital. Darius completely dropped his cardboard box. It hit the hard marble floor with a dull, pathetic thud, his company pens rolling uselessly away across the stone. Sloane, please. Darius begged loudly, hot tears openly streaming down his ruined cheeks. Leave her completely out of this situation. Take all your anger out on me, but let her walk away. She did not know anything at all about the stolen retainer accounts. I did not even acknowledge his pathetic, groveling existence. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the violently trembling, completely terrified mistress standing before me. The corporate security guards have already locked the main revolving doors, I informed her calmly, gesturing smoothly toward the glass entrance. And if you look closely through the glass panels, you will clearly see two marked police cruisers currently waiting silently on the curb. They are absolutely not here to issue a simple traffic citation. They are here to execute multiple felony arrest warrants based directly on the undeniable forensic evidence I just handed over to the district attorney. Jasmine whipped her head violently toward the front doors. The flashing red and blue emergency lights reflected menacingly off the glass panels, illuminating her completely terrified, highly panicked face. Total unadulterated panic completely consumed her entire being. The horrifying reality of a federal prison sentence of losing her entire manufactured, highly luxurious lifestyle shattered her arrogant composure into a million jagged, unrepairable pieces. She was aggressively backed into an inescapable corner, and she instantly reverted to basic primal survival instincts. She absolutely did not care about Darius or his pathetic pleas to save her. She only cared about desperately saving herself from a massive prison sentence. She violently unclasped the heavy Cartier necklace, ripping it aggressively from her neck so forcefully she nearly scratched her own delicate skin. She threw the incredibly expensive jewelry directly onto the hard marble floor, letting the priceless diamonds clatter loudly against the stone. She dug frantically into her expensive designer handbag, pulled out the shiny keys to her leased Mercedes, and hurled them onto the ground right next to the discarded necklace. "I did not know anything!" Jasmine screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, her incredibly shrill voice echoing violently off the vaulted glass ceiling, making absolutely certain every single employee and security guard in the massive lobby heard her desperate confession. I had absolutely no idea the money was stolen from his firm. He forced me to take these expensive things. He completely manipulated me from the very beginning. He told me he was a legitimate millionaire. I am an absolute victim here. She spun around aggressively, pointing a violently shaking, highly accusatory finger directly at Darius's face. His mouth hung completely open in silent, absolute, soul-crushing devastation. The beautiful woman he had destroyed his entire life for, the woman he had committed severe, unforgivable felonies to impress, was actively throwing him to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. "He is a disgusting thief!" Jasmine shrieked hysterically, aggressively backing away from him and waving her arms wildly toward the flashing police cars waiting outside. "He maliciously stole that money from his clients. I am giving absolutely everything back right now. I have absolutely nothing to do with him or his crimes. Arrest him, not me. He is a broke, disgusting, completely pathetic criminal." Darius collapsed heavily onto his knees, right beside his spilled, worthless cardboard box. The sheer magnitude of his absolute, inescapable isolation finally crashed down upon him with the force of a falling building. He had catastrophically lost his highly prestigious job. He had completely lost his incredible unearned wealth. His family was currently facing complete financial and social annihilation upstairs in the boardroom, and now the demanding mistress he had sacrificed his very soul to acquire had publicly aggressively betrayed him simply to save her own skin. He knelt on the freezing cold marble floor, entirely surrounded by the shattered, deeply pathetic remnants of his spectacularly ruined life. He looked slowly up at me, his eyes entirely hollow, completely devoid of any remaining fight, arrogance, or pride. He finally understood the absolute, inescapable truth of his situation. As the heavy glass doors unlocked and the police officers confidently entered the lobby, Darius realized he had absolutely no one left. The cold, fluorescent lights of the downtown mediation center buzzed overhead. I sat perfectly still at the long glass table, wearing a razor-sharp navy suit that projected impenetrable authority. My personal attorney, Marcus Sterling, sat calmly to my right. Marcus was a legendary, incredibly ruthless divorce litigator who specialized in high-net-worth asset protection. He casually reviewed a thick stack of finalized legal documents, his gold pen resting lightly between his fingers. The wooden door to the mediation room slowly creaked open. Darius walked inside, and the sheer magnitude of his absolute downfall was immediately jarring. The arrogant, highly polished legal titan who aggressively demanded perfection from everyone around him was completely gone. He was wearing a cheap, poorly fitted gray suit that hung loosely on his diminished frame. His face was pale, deeply lined with heavy circles of profound exhaustion under his bloodshot eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept a single hour since the catastrophic boardroom massacre. He was accompanied by an overworked court-appointed lawyer who clutched a battered faux leather briefcase. The cheap lawyer looked entirely out of his depth, sweating, as he took the small seat directly across from Marcus. Darius slumped into his chair, refusing to make eye contact. He stared down at the glass table, his hands trembling slightly as he intertwined his fingers. The criminal investigation into his corporate embezzlement was actively destroying his entire existence. The district attorney had seized his passport, frozen his remaining domestic bank accounts, and publicly announced the impending grand jury indictment. "Good morning," Marcus said smoothly, his voice carrying the calm, detached tone of an executioner reading a final sentence. "We are here today to formalize the absolute dissolution of this marriage. My client has generously provided a comprehensive settlement agreement that grants her 100% ownership of all marital assets, including the primary residence investment portfolios and corporate holdings. You will assume total exclusive liability for your individual criminal debts and pending civil judgments. Sign the documents, Darius, and we can conclude this highly unpleasant business before the lunch hour." Darius clenched his jaw. A desperate spark of his old toxic arrogance flickered briefly in his hollow eyes. He leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table. "I am not signing those papers," Darius hissed, his voice cracking with dry, raspy desperation. "You think you can just completely wipe me out and walk away without a single scratch? I still have legal rights. We were married for 5 years. I am legally entitled to equitable distribution of our shared assets." His court-appointed lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling through a thin stack of printed papers. "My client is prepared to officially contest this highly one-sided settlement," the lawyer stammered, intimidated by Marcus's cold stare. "We are prepared to aggressively demand a mandatory $50,000 cash settlement today. If your client refuses to provide this nominal transition package, we will categorically refuse to sign the dissolution agreement. We will officially file to take this divorce to a highly public trial." Darius puffed out his chest, attempting to project fake hollow confidence. "You hear that, Sloane?" Darius demanded, pointing a shaking finger directly across the glass table. $50,000. That is absolute pocket change for you now. You can write that check and make me disappear. But if you refuse to pay me, I swear I will aggressively drag this divorce out for 5 long, miserable years. I will legally contest every single asset. I will forcefully depose you in court. I will make your life an absolute waking nightmare. Pay me the $50,000 so I can secure a decent criminal defense attorney, or I will burn everything to the ground." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I looked at his sweaty, highly desperate face with an expression of mild clinical pity. "You truly never learn, Darius?" I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying calmness that instantly sucked the remaining oxygen out of the small room. "You are sitting in the smoldering, toxic ashes of your own spectacular destruction, and you are still pathetically attempting to run a con." I turned my head slightly and gave Marcus a single, almost imperceptible nod. Marcus smiled, a thin, entirely predatory smile. He smoothly reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a single crisp white piece of paper. He placed it completely flat on the glass table and slid it deliberately across the smooth surface until it stopped directly in front of Darius. Darius looked down at the paper. His fake confidence instantly evaporated. All the blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, freshly exhumed corpse. He let out a sharp, highly audible gasp, his entire body violently recoiling from the document, as if it were highly radioactive. It was not a settlement offer. It was a highly confidential banking printout, displaying a specific complex international routing number. It was the exact account number to a highly secret, incredibly secure offshore banking account located in the Cayman Islands. For the past 3 years, Darius had been secretly skimming money from his legitimate paychecks before depositing them into our joint marital accounts. He had aggressively funneled those stolen thousands into this completely hidden offshore stash. He had arrogantly believed this money was entirely untraceable. He genuinely believed that even if everything else spectacularly failed, he would always have this massive secret safety net waiting for him in the Caribbean. He had planned to use this exact offshore account to flee the country and escape his impending federal embezzlement charges. "How did you possibly find this?" Darius whispered, his voice shaking so violently he could barely articulate the words. "This account is entirely encrypted. It is held behind an impenetrable corporate blind trust. You could not possibly have access to this information." I leaned forward, folding my hands perfectly on the glass table. "You completely forgot who conducts the forensic financial audits." "Darius, why?" whispered, my voice dropping to a lethal, entirely unforgiving cadence. "You thought you were incredibly clever, hiding your assets behind a Caribbean blind trust. But you made one spectacular, utterly catastrophic mistake. 3 years ago, when you initially opened that secret offshore account, you were incredibly stupid. You used a direct wire transfer from our primary joint marital checking account to fund the initial opening deposit." Darius physically flinched, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror, as the absolute reality of his monumental stupidity finally crashed down upon him. "Because you used our joint marital funds to establish the trust, that entire offshore account legally qualified as shared marital property under strict state law," I explained, driving the final lethal stake directly into his heart. "I did not just find your secret account, Darius. I legally presented the initial wire transfer logs to a federal judge. I successfully filed a massive international asset seizure injunction. I fully executed that legal injunction yesterday afternoon." Darius grabbed the edges of the table, his knuckles turning completely white. "What exactly did you do?" he demanded, his voice cracking with absolute unfiltered terror. "I completely liquidated the trust," I stated coldly, looking directly into his ruined soul. "I legally seized the entire offshore account. Every single dollar you secretly hid away for the past 3 years is completely gone. The current available balance is exactly zero. You have absolutely no secret safety net. You have no hidden funds to pay a criminal defense attorney. You have absolutely nothing left." His court-appointed lawyer dropped his gaze, realizing the bluff had failed. Darius sat completely paralyzed. The absolute totality of his profound defeat washed over him. The arrogant, entitled man who had spent years manipulating, lying, and stealing was finally permanently broken. He did not yell, he did not scream, he simply deflated. Darius slowly reached forward with a violently shaking hand. He picked up the expensive gold pen resting beside the legal documents. Without uttering another single word, he completely surrendered. He signed his name rapidly across the divorce agreement, legally granting me 100% of everything we owned. He dropped the pen onto the glass. He stood up slowly, a hollow, empty shell of a human being, and walked silently out of the mediation room with absolutely nothing but the cheap clothes on his back. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing his fate completely. I remained seated at the cold glass table for a long, quiet moment, breathing in the crisp, thoroughly sanitized air of the mediation room. A profound, absolute silence settled over the corporate space, entirely replacing the frantic, pathetic noise of his desperate begging. Marcus smoothly gathered the signed, highly finalized divorce documents, tapping the thick paper edges perfectly flat against the glass. He placed them securely inside his expensive leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a sharp, incredibly satisfying sound. The long, exhausting battle was officially over. I stood up slowly, smoothed the flawless, razor-sharp lines of my tailored navy suit, and walked confidently out of the building and directly into the brilliant, blinding afternoon sunlight. 6 months later, the suffocating, desperate stench of that mediation room was nothing but a distant, highly insignificant memory. I stood silently in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new penthouse corner office, gently holding a steaming cup of expensive artisan espresso. The sprawling, glittering Atlanta skyline stretched out infinitely before me, a vast, complex concrete jungle, that I now comfortably and absolutely dominated. Resting perfectly flat on the absolute center of my massive custom-designed obsidian desk was the highly anticipated latest issue of Forbes magazine. My face graced the glossy front cover, completely unbothered, perfectly styled, and projecting absolute unquestionable authority. The bold, gold-embossed headline printed across my image, "Read the Ruthless Architect, How Sloan Built an Unstoppable Empire." Directly below that, a prominent secondary caption proudly named me as one of the most powerful, highly influential Black women currently operating in the aggressive global corporate acquisition sector. I had not merely survived the deeply toxic, incredibly parasitic environment of my completely fraudulent former marriage. I had aggressively, relentlessly thrived, turning the shattered, pathetic remnants of their fake, crumbling dynasty into the solid foundational bricks of my own absolute, undeniable supremacy. The powerful holding company I had secretly built, while Darius foolishly squandered his life away, had miraculously tripled in its total market valuation over the last 2 financial quarters. I now personally employed hundreds of brilliant, highly capable, incredibly loyal professionals. My elite public relations firm, no longer heavily burdened by the tedious, secret task of financially subsidizing a highly incompetent fraud, officially secured massive international contracts with incredibly wealthy, fully legitimate tech conglomerates. I legally owned the executive boardrooms. I completely owned the entire corporate narrative. Meanwhile, the unforgiving universe had aggressively delivered the exact incredibly severe consequences my former highly arrogant relatives had so richly and completely deserved. Their spectacular, highly public, deeply humiliating financial downfall was absolutely complete and entirely irreversible. Darius currently works as a miserable, low-level, heavily monitored data entry clerk in a completely windowless, incredibly depressing basement office. Stripped entirely of his prestigious legal license, publicly disgraced across the entire city, and permanently drowning in massive, unpayable criminal restitution debts. He spends his pathetic, miserable days manually typing endless alphanumeric codes into a blinking, outdated computer screen. He takes the crowded public bus to work every single morning because his leased luxury vehicles were immediately repossessed by the aggressive federal government. His new entry-level coworkers do not know he was once a highly arrogant, extremely wealthy corporate attorney, and he absolutely lacks the remaining human confidence to ever tell them his true history. He silently eats cheap, heavily processed sandwiches completely alone in a dingy, poorly lit employee break room, jumping nervously every single time his harsh shift manager raises their voice. Kendra and Malik experienced a similarly devastating reality check. Stripped of their stolen millions and their fraudulent Buckhead mansion, they now live in a cramped, incredibly noisy studio apartment located directly next to a busy commercial train track. The golden couple who once mercilessly mocked my freelance career now sleep on a cheap, sagging futon. Kendra spends her miserable days aggressively fighting with Malik over their mounting grocery bills and unpaid utilities. Her designer wardrobe was seized during the federal bankruptcy proceedings, leaving her with absolutely nothing to flaunt. They share one ancient sputtering sedan that barely starts in the morning, their previous elite social status completely eradicated. But perhaps the most fitting, deeply satisfying justice belongs entirely to Vivian. True to my word, I protected her employment status. Vivian works the grueling, incredibly exhausting night shift at one of my largest commercial fulfillment centers on the outskirts of the city. Wearing a heavily stained, unflattering gray uniform, she pushes a heavy industrial mop bucket across miles of concrete flooring. She spends her entire shift loudly complaining to anyone who will listen about her former wealth, her stolen legacy, and her highly ungrateful daughter-in-law. The other janitors simply ignore her, rolling their eyes at the delusional, bitter older woman who constantly babbles about country clubs while scrubbing commercial toilets for minimum wage. She is utterly, permanently powerless. I turned away from the sprawling city view and walked back to my immaculate desk, running my manicured hand lightly over the glossy magazine cover. The absolute quiet of my penthouse office was incredibly peaceful. There were no arrogant demands, no suffocating expectations, No parasitic relatives attempting to drain my resources to fund their elaborate lies. I walked back toward the massive windows looking out over the city as the early evening sun began to cast a warm golden glow across the towering skyscrapers and the streets below. I took a deep, refreshing breath, quietly closing my eyes very briefly, feeling the absolute undeniable power of total independence coursing through my veins. They tried to bury me because they thought I was just dirt. They didn't know I was a seed. Have you ever had to walk away from people who only loved what you could do for them? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe for more, and remember, never hand your black card to a man who can't even afford his own integrity.